Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? The forest was supposed to be quiet. That was the whole point. After months of grinding through work, city traffic, and endless scrolling, Tyler craved silence. Real silence. The kind that presses in on you when there's nothing but trees for miles and no hum of electricity in the background. He and 3 friends, Erica, Nate, and Josh, had planned this trip for weeks. A long weekend off the grid. No phones, no Wi-Fi, just nature. But on the first night, long after the fire had gone out and the others were asleep, Tyler's phone buzzed. One buzz. No signal bar, no Wi-Fi, just a single buzz in the dead silence. He sat up slowly, blinking. The tent was pitch black except for the dim screen. The message said, "Don't let him in." No name, no number, just those 4 words. Tyler stared at it, the hairs on the back of his neck prickling. He flicked on the flashlight and unzipped the tent, peering out. Nothing. Trees swayed gently in the breeze. The dying embers of the fire glowed faintly. In the other tents, his friends were motionless, fast asleep. He locked his phone and climbed back into his sleeping bag. Maybe a prank. Maybe someone nearby picked up a brief signal and sent it. Or a glitch. It had to be a glitch. He didn't sleep. Earlier that day, everything had seemed perfect. They'd hiked deep into Silver Pine Woods, a dense patch of forest about 4 hours from the city. The trailhead had a parking lot, a ranger's board with old flyers, and a warning sign that made them all chuckle. You are now entering backcountry. No cell service. No rangers past this point. Proceed at your own risk. Perfect, Nate had said, slapping Josh on the back. Exactly the kind of horror movie setup we were hoping for. Erica rolled her eyes. Let's just not die, okay? They joked, but by the time they set up camp near a remote lake, a subtle unease hung in the air. The trees were too still, the birds too quiet. And now, Tyler stared at his phone in the morning light. The message was gone. He searched through his notifications, text messages, even his system logs. Nothing. It was like it had never been there. You okay, man? Josh asked, sipping instant coffee. You look like you saw a ghost. Tyler hesitated. Yeah, just weird dreams. He didn't tell them. Not yet. That day they hiked further out, just exploring the area. No phones, no distractions, just map, compass, and trail. They joked. They took photos with their old disposable cameras. Part of the disconnect vibe Erica had insisted on, and they followed the lake's edge until it looped into a dense thicket of pine. Tyler couldn't shake the feeling, though. He kept glancing over his shoulder. Once, he thought he saw something behind a tree. Not an animal, not a shadow. Something too still. You keep looking back like you're expecting someone, Erica noted as they paused for a break. You sure you're okay? He forced a laugh. Just being paranoid. By nightfall, they were back at camp, roasting marshmallows and passing around a bottle of cheap whiskey. The stars were brilliant above, no light pollution in sight. They stayed up late, until one by one, they retreated to their tents. Tyler stayed up longest, and that's when he heard it. Crunch. A footstep. Not a deer. Not a raccoon. This was bipedal, slow, deliberate. He froze, holding his breath. Then, another step. Closer. He killed the lantern and crept toward the edge of the site. Nothing moved. The forest was silent again. Then his phone buzzed. No signal bar. Just one message on the lock screen. He's watching you. He didn't sleep again that night. At dawn, Tyler dragged the others out of their tents. Guys, I swear something's out here. They were groggy, annoyed, brushing off his concerns. It's just your imagination, Josh mumbled. Or you're hungover. But Erica looked at him more closely. You're not making this up, are you? Tyler shook his head. Messages. Footsteps. It's like someone's messing with us. They checked the area. No tracks, no signs of disturbance, no one around. Look, Nate said, a little impatient. We're in the woods. It's full of noises and shadows. Probably just an animal. But even Nate sounded like he was trying to convince himself. That afternoon, it got worse. They found the deer just past the edge of their camp. Its body was twisted unnaturally, neck bent completely backwards. No blood. No signs of a predator. Just wrong. Josh gagged. What the hell? Tyler's phone buzzed again. Don't trust your friends. This time, he showed them. They crowded around the screen. No number. No service. Just the words. Okay, that's creepy, Erica admitted. But maybe someone's got a cell tower booster or... Nate cut in. We're 15 miles from the nearest anything. This isn't someone screwing with us. This is something else. They decided to leave. But when they reached the trail back, the markers were gone. Every ribbon they'd tied, every blaze on the trees, vanished. Did we come this way? Josh asked, spinning in place. We did, Erica said. I marked this tree with my knife. She turned it around. No mark, smooth bark. That's impossible, she whispered. They tried to backtrack, but nothing looked right. It was like the forest had changed, shifted, erased their way out. That night, they built a bigger fire and stayed close. No one laughed anymore. No stories, just fear. The night pressed in around them, thick and watching. Every now and then, one of them would jerk their head toward the woods, and then came the knocking. Soft, deliberate, from behind the trees. 3 knocks, then silence. Then, closer, 3 more. Josh stood up, holding a fire poker. Who's there? No answer. Just another knock, this time behind his tent. They circled back to back, eyes scanning. Then the whisper came, right next to Tyler's ear. Let me in. He turned, swinging wildly. Nothing. Just forest. And then his phone buzzed again. Too late. The phone slipped from Tyler's hand and landed screen, down in the dirt. No one moved. The knock, 3 sharp raps, still echoed in his mind. Not random. Not wind or branches. It had rhythm. Intention. Josh whispered, "What the hell did that just say to you?" Tyler's mouth was dry. It said, "Let me in." And then, too late. Erica stepped closer to the fire, eyes wide. "Are you saying it whispered to you?" "It was right next to my ear," he said. "Wraiths. Real. Not imagined." No one laughed this time. Even Nate, usually the first to crack a joke, stood frozen with clenched fists. "Okay?" He finally said, "We're not dealing with some guy in the woods anymore." Josh broke the silence. "We're getting out tomorrow. First light. We hike in one direction until we hit a road, a trail, anything. I'm done." They all agreed. Sleep was out of the question. They took turns keeping watch. The others tried resting in their tents, but the fear made the night stretch into eternity. Tyler sat near the fire, gripping a heavy branch like a bat. At some point, Erica emerged quietly from her tent and sat beside him. "You really didn't make that up?" she asked after a long pause. He shook his head slowly. "I didn't even open the message. It just appeared no number. No notification. Just text on the lock screen like it belonged there." She looked around at the trees. "I keep thinking, what if it's not just out there? What if it's already here with us?" He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Something was here, watching, close. Morning came gray and dim. The air was damp, like it had rained, but the ground was dry. Fog clung low to the forest floor, weaving between the trees. They packed quickly and picked a direction. South, according to Nate's compass. They walked. Hours passed. The fog didn't lift. The trees didn't change. It was like they were walking in a circle. But the compass kept pointing the same direction. They should have been making progress. They weren't. "I don't understand," Nate muttered, tapping the compass. "This thing's not broken." Tyler looked at the sky. What little of it was visible. The sun hadn't moved. It hung low, stuck in the same position it had been when they started. Josh stopped and spun in a slow circle. Has anyone noticed something really off about this place? Everyone looked at him. No birds. No bugs. No sound at all. Now that he mentioned it, it was painfully obvious. No chirps, no buzzing, not even wind. Just silence. Erica whispered, "It's not just quiet. It's dead." They pressed on. Another hour passed. Then they saw the smoke. A thin, dark column rising between the trees, about 200 yards away. Hope sparked in Tyler's chest. Maybe someone's camping. Or a ranger outpost. They moved faster, weaving through underbrush and low, hanging branches. But when they reached the clearing, their blood ran cold. It was their own campsite. Same logs around the fire. Same torn snack bag on the ground. Even Tyler's dropped phone lay exactly where he'd left it. Josh backed up. No. No way. We didn't turn around. We didn't. We walked in a straight line for 5 hours. Nate growled. This makes no goddamn sense. Check the compass, Erica said. Check it now? Nate pulled it out. The needle spun in lazy circles, not settling on any direction. Something's broken. Not the compass, Tyler said, voice low. Use. They sat in the clearing, too stunned to speak. Then Tyler's phone lit up again, but it didn't buzz. Just glowed. A new message. You shouldn't have left. He showed them. Then Nate's phone buzzed too, despite no service. So did Josh's. Then Erica's. Each screen said something different. Nate, he remembers you. Josh, one of you will not leave. Erica, you opened the door. Erica looked up sharply. What does that mean? What door? Josh snapped. This is a trick. Someone hacked our phones. We're being screwed with. By who? Tyler asked. We haven't seen another soul for 2 days. I don't know, man. Rangers, military testing, whatever. I'm not buying the ghost story crap yet. But even Josh didn't sound like he believed himself. They debated for nearly an hour before deciding to rest and try again once the fog lifted. The trees seemed to close in tighter than before, and no one wanted to wander too far anymore. Erica and Nate argued quietly near the edge of the camp, while Josh threw logs on the fire. Tyler stayed apart, staring into the woods. Then he heard it again. A whisper, but not like before. This one came from beneath the ground. He knelt and pressed his ear to the earth. At first, nothing. Then faint murmurs, words, dozens of them, speaking at once, all overlapping, all rising in volume, whispers, chants, cries. He jerked back, his heart hammering. The whispers didn't stop. They got louder, clearer. Don't run. Don't scream. Too late. He scrambled away and the voices fell silent. The others looked over. What's wrong? Erica asked, running to him. Tyler stared at the ground where he'd knelt. It's talking through the dirt. That night, Tyler refused to sleep. The others passed out, exhaustion finally overtaking terror. He sat by the fire, watching the fog roll in again. Around midnight, the woods lit up, dozens of lanterns, floating, moving between the trees in silent procession. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Just watched as the lights circled the camp like wolves around prey. Shapes moved behind them, tall, thin, wrong. No faces, no sound, just shapes holding the lights. And then, one of them stepped forward, closer, into the edge of the firelight. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pale face. But Tyler felt it watching him, deeply, intimately. The figure tilted its head and smiled without lips. Tyler blinked, and it was gone. All of them vanished. The fire sputtered. A sudden gust of wind snuffed it out. Darkness swallowed everything, and from somewhere close, inside the circle of tents, came a voice that was not a whisper, a man's voice. Smooth, deep, calm. Someone let me in. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. He didn't imagine that. It came from right behind him. He turned slowly. The tents were still, but something moved between them. It didn't walk. It glided. He backed away, heart pounding. Suddenly, one of the tents ripped open from the inside. Erica screamed. Tyler sprinted toward her tent and yanked open the flap. She sat upright, eyes wide, gasping for air. "I couldn't breathe," she whispered. Something was in the tent. It was on top of me. Josh and Nate stumbled out of their tents, disoriented. "What the hell's going on?" Josh yelled. Then the smell hit them. Rot, heavy, wet, like something dead had been baking in the sun. They turned toward the trees and saw it. Not a man. Not an animal. A shape, crawling from the tree line on all fours. Too many joints. The limbs moved wrong. Its head rotated slowly toward them. Erica whispered, "That's what was in my tent." And then, like before, it was gone. Vanished between blinks. They didn't speak until sunrise. The fog had cleared. Birds chirped in the distance. Sound returned, like someone flipped a switch. The forest looked normal again. As if nothing had happened, but something had. Something knew them now, and it wasn't finished. Morning came bright and silent. Too bright, too still. Tyler stood just outside the circle of tents, staring at the forest. A breeze ruffled his shirt, but the trees didn't sway. The leaves didn't move. They clung to their branches like paper pinned to a corkboard. Nate was the first to speak. "We're not in a normal place anymore." Nobody argued with him. Erica wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and knelt near the dead fire pit, poking the ashes with a stick like she expected something to crawl out. Josh looked around slowly, turning a full circle. The lights, the crawling thing, the voice, it's all connected. Whatever's messing with us, it's not human. Tyler still hadn't said a word. He was staring at the tree line, at one tree in particular. A towering pine, thicker than the others, maybe 50 feet tall. But what caught his eye wasn't its size. It was the red streak running down the bark, blood red, thick, wet. He walked toward it. Erica noticed and called out, "Tyler, where are you going?" He didn't answer. He stopped about 5 feet from the tree and touched the red line. Warm, sticky. It was bleeding. He stepped back, and the others joined him. Nate touched it and immediately recoiled. "Jesus, that's not sap." Josh sniffed it and swore. "It smells like copper, like a nosebleed." Erica whispered, "Trees don't bleed." Tyler walked around the base. "There's something carved into it." The others followed, circling until they saw what he meant. Letters etched deep into the bark. Faded like they'd been there for years, but still readable. "Return what was taken." Nate blinked. "Taken from who?" Josh shrugged. "What the hell are we supposed to return?" Erica said nothing, because she was staring at the base of the tree, where a shallow hole had been dug, like something had been buried there once and unearthed. They all stood in silence for a long time. Then Tyler said, "We need to leave. Now." They didn't argue. But this time, they didn't try to follow the compass. It had spun uselessly the day before. Instead, they followed the sun, hoping it might lead them to a road or anything. They walked and walked. Hours passed. The sun didn't move. The trees never changed. Then Erica stopped walking. "Guys, look." She pointed ahead. There, hanging from a low branch, was a mirror. A small, square mirror, old, dirty, cracked at one corner, dangling from a length of string. They approached it slowly. The mirror turned slowly in the air, catching sunlight. Then it stopped spinning, and reflected not themselves, but someone else. A woman, pale, thin, hollow eyes, staring back at them from the glass. They all gasped, stepping away at once. Then the mirror snapped off the branch and fell to the ground, shattering. Tyler whispered, "Why would a mirror be hanging out here?" Erica was pale. Not a mirror. A warning. Josh picked up a piece of the broken glass. It was old, worn, smudged with what looked like fingerprints, but not human-sized. Too long. Too narrow. They left it behind and moved faster. By late afternoon, though the sun still hadn't moved, they heard something strange. A bell. Soft, hollow, ringing once then again. Far off. Deeper in the woods. Each time it rang, It sounded closer. Tyler said, "We don't go toward that." But the path curved, and no matter how they tried to avoid it, the sound kept returning, closer, until it seemed to come from within the trees all around them. Then it stopped, dead silence again. Erica turned slowly in place, scanning the woods, and then she saw it. A figure. Not moving, not breathing, just standing among the trees watching them. It wore what looked like a veil, tattered and yellowed with age. Its hands were bare, long-fingered, gray, and it held something in one hand, a bell. Then it lifted its head and grinned. Even under the veil, they saw it. Rows of thin, white teeth, too many, too wide. Tyler grabbed Erica's hand. Run. They did. Branches slapped their faces. Thorns tore at their arms. But they didn't stop. The bell rang again. Close. Right behind them. Josh tripped and screamed. Then Nate pulled him up. The forest blurred around them. And then, without warning, they stumbled into another clearing. But this one was different. A house stood in the center, old, rotting, covered in moss and ivy. The windows were blackened. The door hung half open. Erica gasped. "What the hell is a house doing out here?" Josh said, "Who cares? If there's a phone, we can call for help." Tyler hesitated. The house felt wrong. It looked solid. But something about the way it sat on the land made his stomach twist. Like it had grown there. Like it was part of the woods now. But they were out of options. They stepped inside. The interior was worse than the outside. The air was thick with mold and decay. Furniture sagged with rot. Cobwebs hung like curtains. A fireplace. A dusty couch. A broken clock ticking backward. Erica covered her nose. "This place smells like death." Tyler checked a side room. Empty. Another room, just a bed with broken springs. But something had been sleeping in it recently. The sheets were rumpled. Still warm. Then Erica called out from the far end of the house. "I found something." They followed her voice into a back room. The walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. All pinned up, some with nails, some with teeth marks. All black and white. All of the same 5 people. Them, their group, sitting around the campfire, walking through the woods, sleeping in tents. Pictures taken from impossible angles, from above, from the trees, from inside their tents. Erica backed away, hands shaking. "No one took these. We didn't. How?" Then they saw the last row, the bottom photos. Each one was a close-up of their faces, sleeping, then screaming, then dead. Nate ran to a window and tried to open it. Stuck. Josh kicked at the front door, wouldn't budge. Tyler grabbed Erica's hand. "We're leaving. Now." Then the bell rang, inside the house. They turned. The veiled figure stood in the hallway, motionless, bell in hand. Then it tilted its head and stepped forward. Tyler grabbed the broken lamp from the table and hurled it. Glass shattered. The thing didn't flinch. Erica screamed. Josh kicked open the back door, and they spilled out into the woods, running until their legs gave out. They didn't stop until night fell again. Now they sit in silence, huddled around a weak fire. The forest is watching. The veiled woman with the bell is still out there. And the message on the tree haunts them all, return what was taken. But they don't know what, or who, and the forest is growing impatient. The fire barely stayed alive. Josh sat closest to it, feeding it twigs like they were oxygen tanks, keeping him from suffocating. His hands trembled with every movement. Tyler stared into the darkness, gripping a thick branch like a weapon. His eyes didn't blink much. He kept glancing back toward the woods behind them, the direction they'd run from hours ago, as if he expected her to return. The woman with the bell. Erica hadn't said a word since they escaped the house. She sat curled under Nate's jacket, staring into nothing. And Nate was doing the math in his head. "There's no way," he mumbled. "We walked straight for 2 hours. There's no way we're still here." "What are you saying?" Tyler asked. "I'm saying." Nate looked up, eyes hollow. "We never left." Silence fell again. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked. Then another. The wind didn't blow, but the trees made noise, like they were whispering. They hadn't slept. They didn't dare. But as the hours dragged on, exhaustion forced them to take turns. Erica watched the fire while the others dozed. At some point, though she couldn't say when, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching leaves nearby. She stood up slowly and backed toward Tyler, nudging him. He opened his eyes instantly. "Don't look," she whispered. "But someone's watching." Tyler sat up. Josh woke next. Then Nate. The fire dimmed. No one said anything, but they all felt it. Something close. Josh stood up first and turned toward the trees. That's when they saw it. A hand, sticking out from the bushes, not moving, as pale as snow and stiff like stone, just the fingers reaching upward. Erica gasped. Jesus. Tyler moved forward slowly and knelt beside the bush. The hand wasn't attached to a body. It had been planted, like a root, shoved into the dirt up to the wrist. Josh bent forward and brushed away leaves. Then he saw it. More hands. 6, maybe 7, all around them, all reaching out of the soil, not fresh, not skeletal, but mummified, wrinkled and gray and real. Nate backed away and tripped over something. He turned to look and screamed. A face, staring up at him from the dirt, eyes open, lips peeled back in a silent scream. Not a corpse, a mask, made of flesh. They ran again, this time without direction. The forest twisted around them, turning and shifting like it had a mind of its own. Eventually, they came to another clearing. This one had a well in the middle. Stone. Ancient. Covered in vines. They stopped at the edge, panting. Erica walked toward it. "Don't," Nate warned. She didn't listen. She looked inside. There was no water, no bottom, just black. Then, movement. From inside, she gasped. Someone was down there. A face appeared from the shadows. Pale, male, crying. It was Ben. Erica stumbled backward. "Ben! Ben!" "He's down there?" Tyler pushed her aside and looked. Nothing. Just black. No face. No sound. Erica grabbed Tyler's arm. "I saw him! He was crying!" He tried to say something. Josh said, "Ben's dead." "You saw the photos?" "No," she said, trembling. "They want us to think he is. But he's not. He's trapped. Somewhere." Tyler looked again. Still nothing. But Nate had gone pale. His eyes were locked on the stone rim of the well. There, scratched into the moss, were letters. Faint. Almost erased by time, but still there. The sin was silence. That night, they didn't stop. They walked in a line, not speaking, barely breathing. Around midnight, they found a second tent site. Old, torn, molded with rain and rot. 5 tents. Familiar colors. Josh walked to the first one, unzipped it, and looked inside. His own backpack. Just like the one on his back now. He turned slowly. Tyler unzipped another. Inside, a journal. Erica's, with her name written in the corner. The last page had an entry dated August 4. Today was August 4. They all stared at each other. Erica opened the journal. Inside were notes. About the trip, about the group, about things that hadn't happened yet. She flipped to the end. The last sentence made her knees buckle. "The forest remembers. We do not. This is our 4th time. The blood wants what we buried. 4th time." Tyler asked, horrified. Josh backed away. "We've been here before." Erica nodded slowly. "And we forget. Every time. Maybe the woods make us forget." Nate turned pale. "That's what the photos were. That's what the house showed us. They've been watching us every time." Tyler stared into the trees. "So what are we supposed to remember?" Erica's voice cracked. "What we buried." The rest of the night passed in fearful silence. By dawn, they returned to the bleeding tree. It still wept red down its bark. But now the words below the streak had changed. No longer, "Return what was taken." Now it said, "You stole her name." Tyler took a step back. "What the hell does that mean?" Josh suddenly froze. "I remember something." Everyone looked at him. He closed his eyes. "We were drinking. Last summer. Out here. Ben dared us to go deep into the woods. Said it was haunted. Keep going, Erica whispered. We found a mound, like a grave. Small, no stone, Josh swallowed. There was a doll on it, carved from wood, with a name scratched in the base. We laughed. Ben picked it up, said it was creepy. Erica covered her mouth. He smashed it, said the place gave him chills. We all laughed, and then we buried it. Tyler whispered, we buried the doll. Josh nodded. I think so. Under this tree. Erica looked sick. Wood desecrated a grave. They didn't speak again for a long time. Eventually, they began to dig. Hands, sticks, whatever they could find. The ground was damp, like it bled when disturbed. After an hour, Nate hit something solid. Wood, not a coffin. A box. About the size of a shoebox. Carved. Old. He lifted it slowly. The moment he touched it, the bleeding tree stopped. The red streak dried instantly. Tyler stared. What the hell is in that? Josh said nothing. He knew. Erica opened the box. Inside was what remained of the doll. Broken. Rotting. Covered in dried blood. But beneath it, tucked in the folds of ancient cloth, was a nameplate. One word carved in deep red, Maeve. Suddenly, the air grew heavy. The sky darkened. The bell rang again. From behind them, they turned. She was there. Maeve. No veil this time. They saw her face. Thin, gray with black pits for eyes and a jagged smile. She stepped forward slowly and pointed at the box. Tyler didn't hesitate. He knelt and placed it at the base of the tree. Here. We're sorry. We didn't know. Maeve's smile widened. Then she opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was like 1,000 insects crawling inside a metal drum. One returned. 3 remain. She vanished. They stood in silence. Tyler turned to the others. 3 remain. What does that mean? Erica looked at the box. Maybe it wasn't just the doll. Nate said, maybe she wants the truth. Josh whispered, maybe it's not over. And the woods agreed. They felt it in the wind. In the roots beneath their feet. The forest wasn't finished with them. Not yet. The forest didn't breathe that morning. It pulsed. A low throb beneath the ground. Like a heartbeat buried in the soil. Nate could feel it through his boots. Josh swore he heard whispers in the wind. Low, feminine, always repeating the same phrase. 3 remain. Not one of them spoke for hours. They didn't have the words. Maeve had shown herself. The girl they had mocked. The grave they had desecrated. And she'd only accepted part of the offering. Tyler kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting her to return. Erica walked with the broken doll box tucked in her backpack like a cursed relic. By noon, they found a stream that hadn't been there before. It was thin, clear, and red, not thick like blood, but tinted, faintly. Josh cupped some in his hands and sniffed it. Iron, he whispered. Too much iron. They walked along it in silence, until they saw the symbol. A flat rock sat beside the stream, blackened and cracked. At its center was a carving, deep, raw, a circle of teeth, each jagged like a child's drawing of a sun. Beneath it, scratched in chaotic lines, was a phrase. She kept her smile, because we took her voice. Erica shivered. What does that mean? Tyler didn't answer. He just knelt by the rock, running his hand over the carving. The teeth. Maeve's grin. Nate muttered. She wasn't buried in silence. We silenced her. Josh stood still. No. This is more than just a doll. More than just a grave. We did something else. Erica nodded slowly. We took something. They followed the red stream deeper into the woods, and the trees began to change, not in shape, not in size, but in mood. Bark peeled like skin. Roots stuck out like fingers, and between the trunks, something shifted. Not animals, not shadows, but reflections. They saw themselves, young versions, laughing, drinking, running through the same woods. Josh's voice came from nowhere. Let's bury it. Who gives a crap? Tyler's laugh echoed. She was never real, anyway. Erica covered her ears. Nate fell to his knees, shaking. You said we'd forget Ben. You said it wouldn't follow us! Ben. Josh whispered. Ben brought us here. They came to a circle of stones, 7, arranged like an old ritual site. At the center, a pile of bones, small ones, hands, feet, a broken jaw, but not human, animal. On top, a journal. Erica picked it up. Its cover was cracked and moldy, but her name was carved into the leather. Not written, carved. She opened it. The handwriting wasn't hers, but it was familiar. Ben's, page after page of notes, drawings of the bleeding tree, of Maeve's face, of symbols, rituals, ancient forest spirits. One entry made her stop breathing. We thought it was just a local myth, a joke, but she's real. The girl with the bell, the one who died voiceless. She was a twin. Her sister disappeared first. The town buried it. We found the grave. We laughed. We took the doll. But that wasn't the real sin. The sin was the third thing. What's the third thing? Nate asked. Erica turned the page. There was a name, one she whispered to me in a dream. Talia. She said it was the key. She said we buried it too. And until we return all 3, none of us leave. The doll was the first. The voice was the second. The third is the name. Tyler backed away from the journal. That's what she meant. You stole her name. Josh blinked. We took it from her grave. The plaque, we scratched it off. I remember it now. We thought it would be funny. Nate added, and Ben, he kept it. Erica looked at the journal. It must still be here, somewhere. They turned as one toward the woods. The sun didn't rise higher. It just hovered, frozen in an eternal late afternoon glow. Like the forest had decided time was no longer necessary. By the time they reached the ruins, the red stream had disappeared. The structure was barely standing. Just a few beams, rotten, black with age. But there was something inside, a door, standing upright, propped between 2 trees like a portal. Erica reached out, and the moment her fingers touched it, the bell rang. Behind them, she turned slowly. Maeve was there, but this time, she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a smaller figure, same dress, same pale face, but younger, eyes sewn shut. Josh whispered, her sister. Maeve raised her hand, 3 fingers, then pointed at the door. Erica turned the knob. Inside was nothing, just a wooden box, identical to the one they'd unearthed under the tree. She knelt and opened it. Inside was a single object, a metal plate, old, rusted, and carved with one word, Talia. Josh stepped forward. Erica handed it to him. As his fingers closed around it, the woods changed. The wind stopped. The sun blinked out like a dying bulb. Everything went black. Then the ground split. They fell, hard, into mud, water, bones when they scrambled to their feet. They realized they were in a pit. Dozens of bodies surrounded them, all in various stages of decay, all children, all with their mouths sewn shut. Tyler threw up. Erica backed into Nate, sobbing. Josh stared at the plaque in his hand. Maeve appeared again, floating above them, arms spread wide. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Instead, the children around them began to rise. Slowly, joints creaking, and in unison they began to hum. A low, horrible sound that didn't vibrate the air. It vibrated the soul. Maeve descended slowly. She pointed at the plaque and smiled. Erica held it up. Here! She screamed. Take it! We're sorry! The humming stopped. Maeve hovered forward, took the plaque in both hands, and screamed. Not a sound, but a force, like air being ripped apart. The pit vanished. The sky returned. The trees straightened. They were back by the bleeding tree, but this time it was silent and clean. No blood, no whispers, no Maeve. The group stood in silence. Tyler looked at the others. Did we do it? Erica whispered. All 3. Josh nodded. The doll, the voice, the name. Nate looked up at the sky. It was finally changing. Blue, bright, real. For the first time in what felt like days, birds chirped. The forest released them. They walked for hours, but the path didn't shift this time. By sunset, they reached the ranger trail. Their cars were where they'd left them. Dusty. Real. Josh sat on the hood of his truck and cried. Nate collapsed in the grass and stared at the sky. Tyler pulled out his phone. There was signal, dozens of missed calls, messages from Ben, the most recent one just hours ago. You need to go back. I couldn't finish it. She won't let me leave. I'm sorry. Erica stared at the forest behind them. I think we made it, she said. Josh looked at her, but Erica didn't smile. She turned toward the woods and whispered something none of them understood. Not all of us did. The forest was silent. Not the peaceful silence of nature, but an oppressive stillness that pressed against their ears and hearts. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot, felt amplified in the void. Erica clutched the journal tighter, its pages now damp with sweat and fear. The words within had guided them this far, revealing truths they were never meant to uncover. We need to keep moving, Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. Josh nodded, leading the way through the dense underbrush. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself resisted their passage. They came upon a clearing where the trees formed a near-perfect circle. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered, covered in moss and lichen. Nate approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings. This wasn't on any map, he murmured. Erica opened the journal to a bookmarked page. A sketch of the altar stared back at her, accompanied by a single sentence. Where the circle stands, the truth is bound. As they stepped into the clearing, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, extinguishing their lanterns and plunging them into darkness. From the shadows, whispers emerged. Not words, but emotions. Anger, sorrow, betrayal. The group huddled together, their breaths shallow and rapid. A figure materialized atop the altar, cloaked in shadows. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, piercing through the darkness. You have disturbed the balance, the figure intoned, its voice echoing in their minds. Erica stepped forward, her voice trembling. We didn't mean to. We were trying to make things right. The figure raised an arm, pointing toward the forest. Then face the consequences of your actions. The ground beneath them trembled, and the trees groaned as if in pain. From the shadows, shapes emerged. Twisted forms that once were human, now corrupted by the forest's wrath. The group turned to flee, but the forest had changed. Paths twisted upon themselves, trees shifted positions, and the very air seemed to conspire against them. Trapped and surrounded, they prepared to face the consequences of their past, hoping that their resolve would be enough to withstand the forest's judgment. They ran, not because they believed they could outrun what was coming, but because instinct demanded it. The forest was alive, shifting, whispering. Behind them, the clearing with the altar faded into a wall of black trees. It had swallowed them whole. Josh stumbled over a root that hadn't been there seconds ago. Nate caught his arm before he fell face first. They're hurting us, Nate gasped, scanning the trees, like cattle. Erica clutched the journal to her chest. It's changing again, she said, flipping through the pages. The writing, it's different. What do you mean different? Tyler asked, his eyes darting around as though he expected something to reach out and grab him at any moment. It's not just telling us things anymore, she said, her voice low and distant. It's answering us. They stopped in a narrow path lined with birch trees. The white bark reflected the moonlight in strips like fractured glass. Josh grabbed the journal from her hands, flipping it to the latest page. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He turned it so they could all read. You've come farther than the others. But that doesn't mean you'll leave. What others? Erica whispered. Nate turned around slowly, scanning the dark woods. I think that's what we're about to find out. A sound rose behind them. Not footsteps. Not the rustling of animals. It was laughter, dry, brittle, like leaves crumbling in your palm, and it was close. Tyler pulled out the flare gun they'd brought for emergencies. Whatever that is, it's not going to get the drop on us. They stepped forward as a group, the forest seemingly parting for them, forming a path. That's when they saw it. An old campsite. Tents rotted away to frames. A campfire pit filled with bones, not animal. Old gear, torn clothes. A lantern, still glowing faintly with a pale green light. This wasn't here before, Nate said, voice hoarse. This is them, Josh finished. The ones who stayed. Shadows moved around the edges of the site, circling. Whispers became voices. You found our book. You opened the door. You thought you were the first. Figures emerged. Not alive. Not dead. Not anymore. Their faces were twisted remnants of what had once been people, eyes hollow but burning with recognition. Some still wore hiking boots. Others had camping backpacks, now fused to their skin. Erica backed away, heart thundering. They're stuck. Trapped. Tyler aimed the flare gun and fired. A blinding red light illuminated the campsite. For a moment, the shadows recoiled, shrieking. The group ran again, not knowing where they were going, only away. Branches clawed at them. Voices howled behind. And ahead, the trees opened just slightly, to reveal a small wooden cabin. It looked untouched by time. A lantern flickered in the window. They didn't think. They just ran to it. Josh reached the door first and flung it open. They stumbled inside and slammed it shut behind them. Silence. Then the sound of wind outside and something else. A scratching on the door. Light, almost polite. Then a voice, calm and patient. You can't hide from the forest. Inside, the cabin was lined with journals. Hundreds of them, all identical. Erica walked to a table and picked one up. She opened it. The first page read, "This is the story of the ones who thought they'd be different." And beneath it, "This is your story now." The cabin smelled of old wood and decay, but the air was thick, as if charged with something unseen. Something pressing down on them. Erica's hands shook as she held the journal, flipping through its pages like they were made of paper, thin glass. The words stared up at her, blurring together before her eyes. She wasn't sure if they were written in ink, or if they had somehow bled into the paper from the air itself. Every time she read a sentence, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift slightly, as if the cabin itself was adjusting to her presence. "This is it," she whispered, a tremor running through her voice. "It's all here." "What is?" Josh demanded, but he was looking around, eyes darting from the journal to the windows, unable to keep still. It's everything. The history. The names. The people who've been here." She turned another page. The ones who stayed, they weren't the first. They were part of something bigger. Something older. Nate moved to the window, peering out through the grimy glass. The forest beyond was silent now. Too silent. The usual night sounds, the chirping of insects, the rustle of leaves, had vanished, replaced by a thick, suffocating quiet. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. "Let me see that," Tyler said, his voice low, almost as if speaking any louder might make something in the room hear him. He took the journal from Erica, his fingers brushing against hers. For a moment, they both froze. His touch sent a chill through her, though he hadn't been holding it for long. Josh stepped back, running a hand through his hair, eyes wide with desperation. "We need to leave. Now." But Tyler didn't respond immediately. He stared down at the journal, his gaze locked onto a particular page. A page they hadn't seen before. It was different from the rest. The ink was darker, almost black. It read, "The forest is alive. It watches, it waits, and it feeds on the lost." Josh's heart skipped a beat. He didn't want to believe it, but something deep inside him told him the truth. The forest, the clearing, the altar. Everything was a trap, and they were caught in it. "Shit," Nate muttered. "We're the next ones. The next ones to stay." Erica looked over at him, her eyes wild with panic. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" "We're not leaving," he said, his voice growing shaky. We're part of the story now. The ones who stay. We become part of the forest. He shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. There's no escape from it. Tyler slammed the journal shut. Enough. His voice was sharp, commanding. But his hands were trembling, and his eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting someone, or something, to step inside. We're not staying here. We're getting out. But as he said it, the room seemed to pulse, as though the cabin itself had heard his words and rejected them. The floorboards groaned beneath their feet, and a cold wind rushed through the cracks in the walls, extinguishing the lantern on the table. Darkness wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket. Then the scratching started. Slow at first, faint, like nails dragging across the wood outside. But it grew louder, more frantic. Someone knocked on the door. The sound was sharp, almost deliberate, like a signal. Erica froze, her blood running cold. "Who is it?" she whispered, but no one answered. The scratching continued. Tyler moved toward the door, hands shaking as he reached for the handle. "Don't open it," Josh pleaded, grabbing his arm. "We don't know what's out there." But Tyler pulled away, his face pale and determined. "I have to. I need to know if we can get out." He wrenched open the door. The wind howled in, sharp and bitter. The doorway revealed nothing but the dense, inky blackness of the forest. The trees stood still, unmoving. No creatures, no figures, just the oppressive darkness, as if the forest itself had swallowed everything. Then the air shifted. A low hum rose from the depths of the woods. The ground vibrated beneath their feet. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, but from all directions now. It was as if the forest itself was trying to claw its way into the cabin. Tyler stepped back from the door, eyes wide with horror. "We're not alone," he whispered. "It's all of them, the ones who stayed." Erica's breath caught in her throat. "It's happening again. They're coming for us." A figure appeared in the doorway. Not human. Not fully. The shape flickered, its features not quite solid, shifting like a mirage. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that stretched and contracted, as if the world itself bent around it. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and its mouth opened in a silent scream that echoed in the cabin's walls. "Get back!" Josh shouted, grabbing Erica's arm and pulling her away from the door. But it was too late. The door slammed shut, but not from their hands. The force of it shook the walls, and the shadow outside didn't leave. It pressed against the door, its form sliding through the cracks like oil seeping through fabric. They were trapped. The figure's face pressed against the wood, its eyes staring at them, seeing right through them. Then the voice came. Not from the figure, but from somewhere inside the walls. "You're not leaving. You're part of us now." The scratching stopped. The wind died down. The figure disappeared, and all that was left was the silence. The silence in the cabin was oppressive, pressing against their chests as though it were a living thing, suffocating them. Josh's breath came in short, shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his ears. His hand still gripped Erica's arm, but she barely noticed, her eyes wide and distant. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together the nightmare they were trapped in. "They're still out there," Tyler murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it." Nate nodded in agreement, staring at the door as though expecting it to fly open at any moment. Whatever it wasn't human. He shook his head, trying to shake off the feeling of wrongness that had seeped into his bones. "I don't even know what the hell that was." Erica's eyes flicked to the window, her gaze lingering on the darkness beyond. The woods stretched out in every direction, an endless sea of shadows. But it was more than just the forest that made her uneasy. There was something wrong about the air itself. It felt thick, like it was pressing down on her mind, twisting her thoughts. She grabbed the journal again, her fingers trembling as she turned to the page that had haunted her all night. The ink seemed to writhe before her eyes, as though it was alive. She couldn't make sense of the words, not fully, but there was something she couldn't ignore, something that felt like a warning. The forest does not forget. The lost ones will find their way home, but they will not be the same. The earth hungers for the ones who are meant to stay. The words blurred, but the meaning cut through her like a knife. The forest, she whispered, but her voice faltered. It changes people. Those who stay. It takes them. Josh turned toward her. What are you talking about? What do you mean? It takes them. Erica swallowed hard, trying to push back the rising panic in her chest. It's all here in the journal. The others, the ones who stayed before us, they didn't just leave. They were... She couldn't finish. The words were too much, too heavy to say aloud. Were what? Tyler asked, his voice raw. They were transformed, Erica said, finally allowing the words to escape her lips. The forest changed them, made them part of it. She choked on the words. They became something else. There was a long silence as the weight of her words settled over the group. They weren't just dealing with some random event. They weren't just stuck in a bad camping trip. This was something far worse. The forest didn't want them to leave. It wanted them to stay. Forever. Nate stepped forward, his expression grim. How do we stop it? How do we get out of here? Erica's eyes scanned the journal again, but she could feel the words slipping through her mind like sand through her fingers. The answers weren't clear. The more she read, the more she realized that the journal itself was part of the trap. It led them down a path with no escape. Then the air shifted. A low, vibrating hum filled the room again. Only this time it was different. It was deeper, more insistent. The walls seemed to bend and warp, the very structure of the cabin distorting, as if it were no longer bound by reality. It was like they were watching the world around them break apart, piece by piece. Look at the door, Josh shouted, pointing. The door was no longer just a door. It was a void, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to suck in the light around it. The wood cracked and splintered, but instead of breaking, it bent and twisted into shapes that defied logic. Something was trying to get in, something far worse than the figure from before. Tyler moved toward the door, but Erica grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. Don't open it. You don't understand. If you open that door. But it was too late. Tyler's hand was already on the doorknob, and as he twisted it, the world around them seemed to collapse. The entire cabin lurched forward, the walls warping, and a deafening roar filled the room. The door flew open. What they saw beyond it was not the forest. It was not the night. It was a vast, infinite blackness, a swirling void that seemed to stretch on forever, pulling at them with an unseen force. The air was heavy, thick with a cold that gnawed at their bones, and in that endless dark they could hear whispers, soft, broken whispers, calling their names. Erica, Joshy, Tyler, Nate. The voices were familiar, yet distant. They sounded like their own, but twisted wrong. Nate stumbled backward, his face pale with fear. This isn't real. This isn't real. But even as he said it, the words felt hollow, like they were slipping from his own mouth without his control. Josh's eyes were wide with terror. We need to shut it. We need to. The door slammed shut. And then, the world went still. A complete, absolute silence filled the room, but it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. The air was thick, too thick to breathe. The very weight of the silence pressed down on them. Erica felt it first. The change. Her skin tingled and her heart skipped a beat. Her mind felt foggy, like she was waking from a dream, but the dream was slipping away, leaving her with a sense of loss she couldn't explain. And then she heard it, another whisper, right behind her ear. Low. Soft. You are already one of us. Erica spun around, but there was no one there. The room felt colder. The shadows in the corners grew darker, deeper. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was part of the forest. The forest had seeped into the walls, into the air, into their very souls. They were trapped. And they had always been trapped. The whispers didn't stop. They swirled in the air like smoke, too soft to be heard clearly but too distinct to ignore. Erica's heart raced in her chest as she turned, eyes darting around the room. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt like they were frozen in time, suspended between reality and something far worse. Her breaths were shallow, labored. The journal had given them no answers, just more questions. But there was one thing she was certain of now: the forest wasn't just alive, it was aware. It was feeding on their fear, drawing them deeper into its grasp, until they would never be able to leave. "Did you hear that?" Tyler's voice broke through the tension, but there was a quiver of fear in his tone that hadn't been there before. "What?" Nate asked, his voice strained, his eyes wild. "What did you hear?" I don't know." Tyler's hand gripped the back of the chair he was standing next to, his knuckles white. It's like a voice. But it wasn't human. Josh stepped closer to Tyler, his eyes narrowed. "You've got to be kidding me. We're all hearing things now." But Tyler shook his head. "I'm not imagining it. It's coming from inside the walls." Erica felt a chill race down her spine. She stepped toward the far corner of the cabin, eyes fixed on the walls. They looked normal. There was nothing about them that should have seemed wrong. But the more she stared, the more she felt like something was moving beneath the surface. The walls shifted subtly, as though they were breathing. "Guys." Erica's voice was trembling now, though she tried to keep it steady. "It's not just the door. The whole cabin is changing." "What do you mean, changing?" Josh asked, his voice flat, like he couldn't bring himself to process her words. "It's the forest." Erica said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not just the trees. The entire place is alive. It's twisting reality, bending it, pulling us in." Her words hung in the air, but they did little to reassure anyone. The cabin's foundation groaned, as though it was shifting under their feet. The silence between them grew unbearable, and each creak of the wood, each gust of wind outside, felt like it was part of the growing nightmare around them. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from somewhere deep within the cabin. It was followed by a faint, almost inaudible scraping sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. It was coming from beneath them, beneath the very ground they were standing on. Tyler's eyes widened. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Nate replied, but the fear was evident in his voice. He backed away from the corner where the noise had originated. "We're not alone here. We've never been alone." Erica closed her eyes for a moment, trying to focus, trying to make sense of everything. The journal. There had to be something in it that would tell them how to survive this, how to escape. But when she opened it again, she was met with more strange, garbled text. The ink on the page twisted and danced before her eyes. It was no longer readable. A cold wave of dread washed over her. "I can't read it anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "It's like it's changing too." Josh took a step toward her, his face drawn in concern. "What do you mean, it's changing? What does that even mean?" Erica closed the book with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest. "I don't know. But whatever is happening here, it's trying to erase everything we thought we knew." The door suddenly rattled, cutting through the tension like a knife. The rattling became frantic, as though something on the other side was desperate to get in. Tyler moved toward it without thinking. "We need to get out of here." "No." Erica grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "You don't understand. The door, whatever is out there, don't open it." Tyler ripped his arm free. You think I'm just going to sit here and wait for it to come inside? It's not the door you should be worried about, Nate interjected, his voice shaky but filled with an edge of panic. It's the forest. The door is a gateway. If we open it, we'll be pulled in. There's no escape. But Tyler wasn't listening anymore. In a desperate, final act, he wrenched the door open. What greeted them wasn't the outside world. It wasn't even the forest anymore. It was another cabin, identical in every way. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. The same wooden beams, the same dark windows, the same dim light flickering from the corner of the room. The air was thick with a familiar, suffocating heaviness. Erica stepped back, her breath hitching. No. Josh blinked. What the hell? This is... It wasn't possible. They had opened the door to escape, to find safety. But now they had stepped into a nightmare even worse than before. The same walls surrounded them. The same coldness. How did we... Tyler trailed off, but his words were drowned out by the familiar, gut-wrenching screech that came from above. From the ceiling, the shadows began to shift, and a figure dropped down, landing with a sickening thud. It was humanoid, but distorted, its body stretched and warped like melted wax. Its face was an amalgamation of features, half human, half something else. Its eyes glowed with a deep, unnatural light. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. It only smiled. And that smile was enough to make them all realize the truth. They were never going to leave. The forest had already claimed them. They were part of it now. Forever. The figure moved toward them, its limbs jerking at unnatural angles, as though the very essence of it was fractured. But it was more than just a creature. It was the forest itself. And it was coming for them. The creature, if it could even be called that, moved toward them with unnatural grace, its limbs swaying like branches in a windless storm. The dim light from the corner flickered, as if struggling to survive, casting long, warped shadows across the room. The air grew thicker, heavier, each breath harder to take, as if the very atmosphere was closing in on them. Erica felt the weight of its presence before she even saw it fully. The eyes. Those glowing, unnatural eyes, fixed on her. They weren't human. They weren't anything familiar. They were the eyes of something ancient, something that had watched the world unfold and decay, waiting patiently for its time. And now, its time had come. "Stay back!" Tyler shouted, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance as he backed away from the approaching figure. He grabbed a chair, lifting it as if it could provide some sort of defense. But the figure didn't stop. It didn't need to. It glided forward, its body bending at angles that defied logic, twisting and folding into itself. Its smile stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, each one glinting with an almost unnatural gleam. Nate moved first. He didn't wait for anyone to tell him what to do. His feet carried him, as if some primal instinct had taken over, propelling him away from the monster. "No, we need to." Josh began, but Erica grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. "Don't look at it," she whispered, her breath shaky. "We can't look at it. We can't let it see us." But it was too late. The creature was already aware of them, and the more they tried to hide, the more it seemed to grow in power. Erica could feel it, the overwhelming sense of dread that gripped her chest like a vice. The forest had already gotten inside them, inside their heads. There was no escaping it. Tyler's scream cut through the cabin, sharp and desperate, but it was muffled almost immediately, swallowed by the thickening air. When Erica turned, Tyler was no longer in front of her. He had disappeared, as if the shadows themselves had taken him. "No, no, no, no!" Josh cried out, his voice frantic as he stumbled backward. "Tyler!" Where did he go? The room felt like it was closing in, the walls stretching and contracting, as though the cabin itself was alive, pulsing with an energy far darker than any of them had ever known. "Tyler's gone." Nate's voice was hollow, devoid of hope. We need to get out. Now. But where would they go? The forest had already swallowed them whole. There was no escaping it. The very idea of leaving the cabin felt like a cruel joke, a mirage that disappeared as soon as they reached for it. Erica's eyes darted around the room, her pulse pounding in her ears. She couldn't focus. The walls were bending, the shadows twisting like they were alive. Everything was alive, and it wanted them. Erica. Josh's voice broke through her fog of panic. He was shaking her, pulling her away from the edge of the room, trying to snap her out of the trance. "We can't stay here," Erica whispered, her words laced with fear. "We can't. It's not safe. It's never been safe. We can't stay here." "But we can't leave either?" Josh said, his voice cracking. "If we open the door, we'll get pulled in." Erica finished for him, her eyes wide, her mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. The forest isn't just out there. It's inside us. It's in everything. The lights flickered again, and suddenly the door slammed shut with a force that sent a jolt through the cabin. The rumble of thunder, distant at first, grew louder, filling the space with its ominous roar. The shadows seemed to grow larger, creeping across the floor and up the walls, stretching toward them like hungry fingers. "There's no escape," Erica muttered, her voice barely audible. "It's not just the cabin, it's us. We're part of it now." The whispers began again, louder this time, swirling around them in a cacophony of voices. They were impossible to understand, distorted by a power far beyond their comprehension. But one word kept repeating itself. "Mine." It was a word that carried with it an undeniable sense of ownership. The forest wasn't just after their bodies, it was after something deeper. Their essence. Their souls. Erica felt her knees give way, and she collapsed to the floor, her vision swimming. The room swam with darkness, the walls flickering between reality and nightmare, as if they couldn't decide what was real and what was part of the illusion. "Erica." Josh's voice sounded far away, but it was enough to pull her back to the present. She blinked rapidly, trying to focus. The creature, no, the forest, was everywhere now, its presence pressing in on her, suffocating her. The whispers grew louder, filling every corner of her mind, drowning out everything else. But something changed. Through the haze of fear and confusion, Erica saw something, a figure in the distance. Standing in the doorway, someone she hadn't seen before. A woman, tall with wild hair and hollow eyes that glowed in the darkness. She stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics, like she wasn't quite real. "Help us," Erica whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The woman's smile was the last thing Erica saw before everything went dark. Erica's body jerked awake, but the darkness around her felt wrong, suffocating. It pressed in from all sides, thick as a fog, as though the air itself was made of something heavier, something alive. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't seem to catch her breath. She tried to move, but her limbs were frozen. Every muscle screamed in protest, and her eyes darted around, struggling to focus. The last thing she remembered was the woman, tall, with hollow eyes and a smile that was too wide. Now, there was only silence. The silence was unsettling, too perfect. She tried to call out, but no sound came from her lips. She reached for her throat, her fingers trembling, and realized there was nothing there. Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, but even they didn't break the heavy quiet. Where were the others? Panic surged in her chest, and she forced herself to sit up. The darkness faded just enough for her to see. She was no longer inside the cabin. Instead, she was standing in the middle of a vast, endless forest. The trees around her were twisted, their bark dark and slick like they were alive, watching her. And then she heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible at first. Then it grew louder, more distinct. A voice, an agonized voice, calling her name. Erica, she froze, her blood turning to ice at the sound. It wasn't her name in the way she knew it, but something more ancient, more distorted, as though the name itself was being pulled apart. Erica. The voice called again, the whisper echoing through the trees. It wasn't just a voice now. It was 1,000 voices, each one overlapping the other, creating a sickening harmony of despair. Tyler. Erica's voice trembled as she stepped forward, the ground beneath her feet soft and uneven. She couldn't tell if she was moving or if the forest was shifting around her. But no response came, only the eerie whispers. She stumbled through the undergrowth, her mind racing. The forest was alive, pulsing with a rhythm that felt too much like a heartbeat. Every step she took seemed to take her deeper into its grasp, dragging her further away from anything familiar, from the people she cared about. Her heart was pounding louder now, matching the rhythm of the forest's heartbeat. The whispering grew louder, but the words were still incoherent. Yet, there was one sound that stood out from the rest, a single, shrill scream that cut through the air, freezing her in place. It was Tyler. She knew it. Without thinking, she pushed forward, the trees parting for her, as if they were guiding her toward the source. The forest was leading her somewhere, but whether that destination would be salvation or damnation, she couldn't say. Finally, she broke through the thicket and emerged into a clearing. In the center, there was a large stone, jagged and ancient, covered in runes that seemed to pulse with a faint glow. And there, standing next to it, was Tyler. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and his hands were outstretched toward the stone. He was muttering something, his voice a low, broken chant as though he were caught in some kind of trance. "Tyler!" Erica called out, rushing toward him. But as she neared, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The air thickened, and she could feel the forest's power rising, swirling around her in a vortex of dark energy. Tyler's head snapped around, his eyes locking onto hers. But there was something wrong with them. Something empty, hollow. He was no longer the person she had known. His gaze was distant, like he was looking through her rather than at her. "Erica," he whispered, his voice now low and raspy. "You shouldn't have come." "What are you doing?" Erica asked, her voice trembling as she reached for him. "Come on. We need to leave. This place, it's not safe." But Tyler didn't respond. He just stood there, as if lost in a trance, his fingers brushing against the stone. A faint glow flickered in his eyes, matching the runes on the stone. "Tyler, stop." Erica pleaded, but he was beyond hearing her now. His lips parted, and the words that came out weren't his own. They were deeper, older, spoken in a language she didn't recognize. The forest seemed to grow darker, the trees closing in on them like the walls of a prison. The ground beneath them cracked, and the air thickened, choking her breath. Erica's pulse quickened. She had to stop him. She couldn't let the forest claim him too. With everything she had, she lunged forward, grabbing Tyler's arm. The instant her fingers made contact, the forest reacted. A deafening roar of wind and voices erupted around them, shaking the earth. The stone flared with light, and Erica felt a surge of energy blast through her, throwing her back. She landed hard, her body slamming into the ground as the world around her spun. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the stone, now glowing brighter than ever, and the figure of Tyler. His face blank, his eyes lifeless. Erica awoke with a violent gasp, her lungs straining for air as if she had been drowning. The world around her spun in a disorienting blur of black and green shadows. Her body was heavy, weighted down by something that wasn't just the physical exhaustion. It felt like the forest itself had pressed its fingers into her chest, squeezing the life out of her. She tried to sit up but collapsed back to the ground, her head spinning. The air around her felt thick, suffocating, as if she were trapped in a nightmare. She didn't know how long she had been unconscious, but the cold bite of the ground beneath her told her it had been long enough for the forest to shift. Her vision cleared, and she realized she was no longer in the clearing. The stone and Tyler were gone. Instead, she found herself lying on a narrow path through the trees, the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. But this path, it didn't feel natural. The trees around her were too close, their branches curving inward like they were trying to keep her from leaving. She got to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. The whispers were there again, faint at first, but growing louder as she moved. They were calling to her, urging her forward. But now they weren't just voices. They were images, flickering in her mind, images of her friends, of memories she hadn't thought of in years. "Tyler, where are you?" Erica whispered, the desperation in her voice rising. She had to find him. She had to get them all out of this place before it consumed them. The path twisted in unnatural ways, the trees bending and shifting like they were alive, leading her deeper into the forest. The whispers grew louder, but they were no longer just voices. They were thoughts, emotions, fragments of memories from people she didn't know. Every step she took, the air grew colder, the ground beneath her feet colder still. She stumbled, her breath coming in sharp gasps as the weight of the forest seemed to press down on her. Her surroundings were beginning to shift, and the path ahead was no longer clear. Every direction she looked seemed to lead to more of the same twisted trees, the same ever-darkening sky. It felt like she was walking in circles, but the more she struggled to break free, the more the forest pulled her deeper. The whispers started to take shape, words cutting through her mind. "Turn back. Don't go. It's too late." Erica shook her head, trying to clear the voices from her mind. She wasn't going to listen to them. She couldn't. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to give up now. A sudden snap from the trees above her made her freeze. The sound was too real, too close. She looked up, but saw nothing, only the dark canopy above, its branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. Then she heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something much darker. The ground beneath her trembled again, more violently this time. Erica staggered, trying to keep her footing, as the forest seemed to shake with a violent energy. Her heart raced, and she forced herself to keep moving. That's when she saw it. A figure standing at the end of the path. It was too still, too silent. She couldn't make out its face, but she could feel its presence. The air grew even colder as she approached, her legs growing heavier with each step. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice sounding too small. Too weak in the vast emptiness of the forest. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. But then, it tilted its head ever so slightly, as if it had heard her, as if it knew she was there. Without warning, it began to move toward her. The air shifted again, the growling noise intensifying. Erica's blood ran cold as the figure grew closer. Its form was vague, shifting like smoke, but there was something undeniably wrong about it. The way it moved. Too fluid, too unnatural. She wanted to turn and run, but her feet felt frozen to the ground. Her body paralyzed with fear. It was like the forest had dug its roots into her, and there was no escaping it. The figure reached out, its hand. No, not a hand. More like a claw, stretching toward her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she finally found the strength to move. With a scream, she tore herself away, running blindly through the dark forest. The path had disappeared. The trees were closing in, their branches reaching for her, their bark groaning as if alive. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her legs aching from the sprint, but she didn't dare stop. She couldn't. Behind her, the growl grew louder. The sound of something heavy moving through the trees, following her. Every time she thought she had gained distance, the figure was there again, closer than before. She could hear its footsteps, feel the thud of its presence. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, and the whispers in her mind grew into a maddening cacophony of voices. And then, just as she thought she could run no longer, she saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. A faint, warm glow. Hope surged through her chest as she pushed herself harder, faster. She was getting closer. But the figure wasn't far behind, and it was getting faster. Just before the light swallowed her whole, she glanced back one last time. It wasn't a figure anymore. It was something else, something worse. The shadows had taken form, and now they were chasing her. The light in the distance flickered like a beacon of hope, but Erica wasn't sure if it was salvation or another trap. She pushed herself harder, every step a battle, against the weight of the forest's suffocating grip. Her heart thundered in her chest, her lungs burning from the exertion. The growl from behind her was a constant, a reminder that whatever was chasing her was closing in. The trees around her blurred into a swirling mass of shadows and branches. Her vision was starting to fail her, the world spinning and warping as though the forest itself was shifting. It was as if the very air around her was trying to disorient her, to keep her from reaching the light, from finding any escape. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. The glow grew brighter, and Erica pushed forward, ignoring the ache in her legs, the fear clawing at her mind. It was all she had left. A fragile thread of hope. She didn't dare look back. Every time she did, the figure seemed to be closer, its presence pressing in on her like a shadow consuming the light. The path ahead seemed to stretch forever, the forest no longer resembling the place she had entered. The trees twisted unnaturally, their trunks gnarled and clawing at her as she passed. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the forest was alive, watching her every move, anticipating her next step. Then, without warning, she stumbled, falling to her knees in the dirt. Her fingers scraped across the ground as she tried to catch herself, the cold earth pressing into her palms. She gasped for breath, her vision swimming with dark spots. She couldn't afford to stop. She knew that. She couldn't. A screech echoed through the trees, louder this time, a sound that made her blood run cold. The growl behind her grew deeper, more guttural, as though the forest itself were coming to life. Erica forced herself to her feet, her hands trembling as she wiped the dirt from her knees. She could feel the cold sweat clinging to her skin, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't have much time. The figure, whatever it was getting closer. She pushed herself forward, her legs screaming in protest as she stumbled down the darkened path. The light was almost within reach now, its warmth wrapping around her like a lifeline. And then, finally, she reached it. The clearing was a shock to her senses. The air was different here, lighter, cleaner. The trees no longer seemed to close in on her, but instead stood tall and silent, as if they were watching over her. The light came from a small, glowing lantern resting on a wooden post, casting a soft, golden hue across the clearing. For a moment, Erica simply stood there, panting, staring at the lantern as if it were the answer to everything. But something felt wrong. The light was too perfect, too serene. It didn't belong here, not in the heart of this cursed forest. The whispers were louder now, more urgent. They were trying to warn her, but Erica couldn't make sense of them. The growl from behind her grew louder as well, a deep, vibrating sound that made the ground beneath her feet tremble. She turned to face the darkness. There, at the edge of the clearing, the figure stood. It was no longer a mere shape. It was fully formed, towering over her. Its face was obscured, its features indistinct, but there was a malevolent presence about it that sent a chill running down her spine. Erica's breath caught in her throat as the creature stepped forward. Each step it took was slow, deliberate, the ground beneath its feet warping with each movement, as if the very earth was bending to its will. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet felt frozen to the ground. The creature's eyes, if they could be called that, glowed a faint, sickly green, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "No," she whispered, barely able to form the words. "I won't go back." But the creature didn't respond. It merely moved closer, its shadow stretching longer, darker as it advanced toward her. The whispers in her mind intensified, their voices overlapping, drowning out her thoughts. They were no longer just warnings. Now, they were demands pleading with her to leave, to run, to escape before it was too late. But it was already too late. The figure was upon her now, its presence so overwhelming that Erica could hardly breathe. It reached out, its clawed hand stretching toward her, and as it touched her arm, the world around her seemed to shift. The clearing disappeared, replaced by darkness. The light from the lantern flickered and died, leaving her in an impenetrable black void. The creature's grip tightened on her arm, and she felt herself being pulled into the shadows, dragged deeper into the abyss. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding, but the words, those whispers, were now impossible to ignore. They filled her ears, swirling around her like a vortex. Escape. There's no escape. She fought to break free, but it was useless. The darkness closed in around her, and the creature's grip tightened, pulling her closer. Until she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The whispers were gone. The creature was gone. The darkness receded, leaving Erica alone in a vast, empty space. But something was wrong. The air was still heavy with an unnatural cold, and the silence was deafening. She couldn't feel the forest anymore. She couldn't feel the ground beneath her feet. She was weightless. Then, as the silence stretched on, she heard it. A sound, distant at first but growing louder, louder until it was all she could hear. It was the sound of footsteps. No, multiple footsteps, approaching from all sides. The hunt had only just begun. The footsteps echoed through the empty void, a sound that was simultaneously distant and deafening. Erica's heart thudded against her ribs. Her breath shallow and ragged as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She was no longer in the clearing. No longer surrounded by trees, or the lantern's light, or even the shadowed figure that had chased her. This place was something else entirely. The ground beneath her feet was soft, like thick, wet earth, but it didn't feel solid. It felt as though she was floating, suspended in a space that was neither dark nor light. Her eyes darted around, but there was nothing to see, nothing to focus on. The footsteps, those relentless, maddening footsteps, seemed to come from every direction, drawing nearer with each passing second. Erica forced herself to move, her legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. She tried to call out, but no sound escaped her lips. She could feel her voice trapped in her throat, as though the very air around her had stolen it away. Something wasn't right. The footsteps, they were growing louder, closer. But there was something else now, something more. A low hum, barely perceptible at first, but slowly growing in volume, reverberating in the very air around her. The sound was unnatural, a buzzing that crawled under her skin and made her bones ache. It was as if the ground itself was vibrating, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. What is this place? She thought desperately. The air shifted. A cold gust swept past her, raising goosebumps on her arms. She stumbled forward, trying to find her bearings, but the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. The earth was alive, moving and breathing in ways that defied logic. The footsteps were so close now that Erica could feel the pressure of them, the weight of something large and ancient moving just beyond her reach. She wanted to run, to flee, but the sensation of being weightless, of being trapped in a space where movement was a struggle, made every step feel like wading through molasses. And then, as the humming grew louder, the footsteps stopped. The oppressive silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise could have been. It was as though the world itself had frozen, holding its breath. Erica's eyes scanned the endless nothingness around her, her pulse racing. She knew she wasn't alone. The sensation of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen eyes, was overwhelming. She could feel the pressure, the suffocating weight of something ancient, something that had been waiting for her. And then, the voice. It was a whisper at first, a soft murmur that seemed to come from the very air around her, but it was growing louder, clearer. Come closer. Erica's breath hitched in her throat. The voice was not human. It was deep, guttural, as though it came from somewhere deep beneath the earth, or from the very fabric of this twisted space she had found herself in. She turned, her body instinctively trying to retreat from the sound, but the voice followed her, circling her, growing closer with every step. Come closer. It repeated, its tone more insistent now, almost pleading. You are here for a reason. You were chosen. You cannot escape. Erica's mind raced, her pulse quickening. Chosen? What does that mean? Escape. There's no way out. She felt the weight of the voice pressing in on her, pushing her forward, forcing her to listen, to understand. Her feet moved against her will, the steps dragging her forward, as though something unseen was pulling her closer to the source of the voice. The ground beneath her feet changed again. The soft, wet earth was replaced by cold stone, jagged and rough, as though the very earth had split open beneath her. The vibration grew stronger, more pronounced, until the very air felt alive with energy. Erica's eyes widened in horror as she saw it. In the distance, just beyond the swirling darkness, there was a shape, a figure, tall and imposing, standing in the center of an ancient stone circle. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by a thick, shadowy veil. But it wasn't the figure itself that made her blood run cold. It was the thing that hovered above it. A massive, pulsating mass, swirling with shadows and light. Like some kind of monstrous cloud, it seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if it had a life of its own. And within it, Erica could see flashes, glimpses of faces, of people long gone, their eyes wide with fear, their mouths open in silent screams. The voice came again, this time with an edge of triumph. Do you see it now? The truth. Erica felt a pull in her chest, a magnetic force that drew her forward, toward the figure, toward the darkness. She tried to fight it, to break free, but the force was too strong. Her body moved without her consent, her feet carrying her closer to the center of the circle. And then, as if she had crossed an invisible threshold, the world shifted again. The shadows around her seemed to snap into focus, revealing the stone circle in all its twisted, horrifying glory. The stones were not just ancient. They were covered in deep, dark carvings, symbols that pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly energy. Erica's heart pounded as she realized the truth. This was no ordinary forest, no ordinary place. She wasn't just lost in some dark wilderness. She had been brought here, summoned to this cursed place for a purpose that was just beginning to reveal itself. The voice, now more commanding than ever, echoed in her mind. You belong here. Erica could feel the ground trembling beneath her feet as she stepped into the stone circle. Her body, though reluctant, continued to move toward the figure that stood at the center. The air was thick with an unnatural, oppressive force, and the stone beneath her feet seemed to hum with energy. The shadows within the circle stretched and writhed like living creatures, pulling at the edges of her vision. The voice, deep and resonant, continued to echo in her mind. You belong here. Her heart raced, panic rising in her chest. Every instinct told her to run, to escape, but there was no escape. It was as if the air itself was holding her in place, suffocating her with its weight. The figure at the center of the circle seemed to loom larger with every step she took, its outline flickering and shifting. as though it were made of darkness itself. When she was finally within arm's reach of the figure, the shadows parted, revealing its true form. It wasn't human. The being was tall. Impossibly so, its body elongated and thin, draped in tattered, black robes that fluttered in a wind Erica couldn't feel. Its face, if you could call it that, was a void, a smooth, featureless mask of pure darkness. But there were eyes, hundreds of them, floating around the figure, like orbs of shifting light, each one staring directly at Erica, as if they were all aware of her presence. Erica froze, unable to tear her gaze away. Her body was no longer her own. It was as if the shadows had taken hold of her, guiding her actions against her will. The voice, now coming from the figure, was louder, more insistent. "You were chosen," it whispered, its voice both everywhere and nowhere at once. "The ritual has begun." Erica's breath caught in her throat. Ritual? What do you mean? What's happening? She tried to scream, but the words wouldn't form. Her lips moved, but the sound of her voice was swallowed by the dark air. The figure raised a hand, long, spindly fingers that seemed to stretch toward her, the very air warping around them as they approached. She tried to step back, but her legs wouldn't move. She was trapped, caught in the circle, as if the stones themselves were imprisoning her. "Do you feel it?" the figure asked, its voice like the rasping of dead leaves. The awakening, the power of the ancient ones. Erica wanted to scream, to fight, but her body was no longer her own. Her eyes flicked down to the ground, and she saw what she had missed before: carvings in the stone. Ancient symbols, glowing faintly with a sickly green light, were etched into the surface of every stone in the circle. The markings pulsed with life, and as she looked closer, she could see that they seemed to shift, moving like liquid. The air around her began to swirl, the cold wind picking up speed, twisting around her body like a vortex. The buzzing from earlier returned, louder than ever, filling her ears and making her head throb. Her heart pounded in her chest, the rhythm matching the pulsations of the symbols. The figure's hand reached out, its fingers brushing against Erica's skin. The touch was cold, so cold that it burned, sending a shock of ice through her veins. She gasped, her entire body seizing with the shock of it, but she couldn't move. She couldn't even scream. The ground beneath her feet shuddered again, the vibrations stronger now. The symbols in the stones began to glow brighter, and Erica's vision blurred as the world around her seemed to warp and twist. "You are the final piece," the figure's voice boomed. "The ritual requires a sacrifice, a soul to awaken the slumbering ones. And you, Erica, you are that soul." Erica's mind reeled. "A sacrifice? No, this can't be happening." The buzzing grew deafening, a maddening hum that seemed to come from within her own skull. The air was thick with the scent of something old and decaying, like rotting wood and damp earth. She tried to pull away, to break free, but the shadows around her tightened their grip, pulling her closer to the center of the circle. Her legs trembled, and the darkness around her seemed to pulse with a life of its own, closing in, suffocating her. She could feel the coldness of the figure's hand gripping her wrist, its long fingers pressing into her skin like talons. "Don't resist," the voice murmured. "It is already too late." Erica's vision flickered, and for a moment, she saw it, the face of the figure. It wasn't the faceless void she had seen before. No, now the darkness was thinning, revealing something more real. Its face was a twisted mockery of humanity, thin, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin that stretched unnaturally wide, exposing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. The ground trembled violently now, and the stone circle cracked open. A blinding light shot up from the center of the circle, engulfing everything in its glow. The symbols on the stones burned with an intense, searing heat, and Erica's body felt as though it were being torn apart by the pressure. "No," she screamed, finally able to form the words, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the energy swirling around her. please. No. And then, in an instant, the light erupted outward. A wave of searing energy that knocked Erica to the ground, throwing her against the stone. The last thing she saw, before everything went dark, was the figure, its eyes filled with triumph. Erica's eyes fluttered open, but the world around her was nothing like it had been before. The once familiar forest, the dense canopy of trees that had sheltered her, was now a distant memory. She could see only shadows, deep, heavy shadows that clung to the air like smoke, suffocating everything in their path. The ground beneath her was cold, unnaturally so, and she felt the damp earth pressing into her back as she lay on her side. Her body ached, every inch of her feeling as though it had been shattered and put back together wrong. Her fingers twitched, and she could feel the dirt beneath them, gritty and rough against her skin. Her breathing was shallow, and the taste of something metallic lingered in her mouth. She didn't know how long she had been unconscious, but it felt as though hours, if not days, had passed since the ritual. The blinding light, the crack of the earth, the overwhelming pull of the darkness. It was all a blur now, fading like a dream she couldn't quite grasp. But then came the voices. They whispered at first, quiet, almost imperceptible. But as the moments passed, they grew louder, closer, circling around her like vultures. She could hear them clearly now, their words a strange mixture of languages, a jumbled mess of syllables that sent chills down her spine. They were speaking directly to her, the words twisting and turning in her mind like serpents. "You are the key," they hissed. "The awakening has begun. The slumbering ones rise." Erica tried to sit up, but her limbs felt as if they were made of stone, heavy, unyielding. Her head throbbed with a sharp, pulsing pain, and for a moment, she thought she might be sick. But then she remembered the figure, the stone circle, the sacrifice. A cold dread settled in her chest. What happened? Did it work? Suddenly, a sharp, sickening sound filled the air, like a bone snapping, followed by a wet, gurgling noise. Erica's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively turned her head toward the source of the noise. Her eyes widened as she saw what was emerging from the earth. It was a hand, thin, twisted fingers stretching up from the ground, blackened and slick with something that glimmered in the dim light. The hand was followed by another and another, until a body began to pull itself free from the dirt. It was humanoid, but not human, not anymore. The creature's skin was pallid and stretched tight over its bones, its face an empty mask of horror. Its eyes were hollow black pits, its mouth gaping wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The air around it seemed to warp as it moved, as though reality itself bent and twisted in response to its presence. Erica's blood ran cold. She had seen enough horror to know exactly what this was. No. The creature crawled forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. As it came closer, Erica could feel the air around her grow colder, the very atmosphere thickening with an unnatural presence. It was as if the creature was draining the life from everything in its vicinity, stealing the warmth from the world itself. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "The end is near," they hissed. "The ones that sleep shall awaken. The world will fall." Erica tried to scramble backward, but her body was still too weak, too sluggish. The ground beneath her felt unstable, and she realized, with growing horror, that she wasn't lying on solid earth. She was on something else, a surface that seemed to shift and pulse with a dark, living energy. Before she could react, the creature lunged at her, its skeletal hands grasping at her with inhuman speed. It let out a low, guttural growl, its mouth snapping open wide. Erica screamed, throwing her arms up instinctively to protect her face. But she was too slow. The creature's cold, clammy hands closed around her wrist, its grip like iron. She could feel its sharp claws digging into her skin, cold fire spreading up her arm as the creature pulled her closer to its rotting face. Its breath was putrid. like decay and death itself, and she felt her stomach lurch at the stench of it. "No," she cried, twisting her body, trying to break free, but the creature's grip tightened, pulling her closer. "You are the final piece," it croaked, its voice a low, rasping whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "The ritual is complete. The awakening is upon us." In a desperate move, Erica reached for anything that could help her escape. Her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, stone, the edges sharp and rough beneath her touch. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed the stone, her fingers wrapping around it tightly. She didn't think, she just swung the stone toward the creature's face, crashing it into its skull with all the strength she could muster. The creature recoiled, shrieking in a voice that made her blood run cold. The grip on her wrist loosened, and Erica took the opportunity to wrench her arm free. She scrambled backward, her heart racing as she stood on shaky legs, her body still protesting against every movement. The creature hissed at her, its black eyes narrowing with fury. The ground trembled again, and more figures began to rise from the earth. Others like the first, their forms twisted and deformed. It was as if the ritual had opened a gateway. And now the creatures were flooding into the world, each one more grotesque than the last. Erica's breath came in shallow gasps as she turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay here, not with those things closing in on her. Her legs screamed in protest as she pushed forward, the whispers echoing in her mind. "You cannot escape," they said. "The end has come. The slumbering ones awaken, and you are their herald." But Erica didn't listen. She ran. She had to survive. Erica's heart hammered in her chest. As her feet pounded against the forest floor, her breath ragged, each step feeling like a battle against the weight of the air itself. The darkness around her was suffocating, thick and oppressive, as though the night itself was conspiring to drag her down into its depths. The whispers, once distant, now seemed to fill the entire space, their words melding into a low, menacing hum that buzzed in her ears. "The ritual cannot be undone," they whispered, their voices twisting and curling around her thoughts. "The world will fall. The end is here." Erica pushed harder, forcing herself to focus, to block out the crushing weight of the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't afford to stop, not for a second. Those things, those creatures, were still behind her. She could feel them. The ground trembled with every step they took, their movements unnaturally swift, as if they were one with the earth itself. She had no idea how long she'd been running, but the dense woods seemed to stretch on forever, the trees now bending inward, their twisted branches clawing at her as if they, too, wanted to claim her. The moon had disappeared behind thick clouds, leaving her with only the faint glow of the creature's eyes in the distance, their black pits like voids that threatened to swallow everything in their path. Her legs were giving out, her strength waning with every passing second. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root, sending her crashing to the ground. Pain shot up her leg as she hit the earth, and for a moment she lay there, gasping for breath, the forest spinning around her. But there was no time to rest. The sound of something heavy crashing through the underbrush reached her ears, and she knew that they were close, too close. She forced herself to her feet, gritting her teeth against the pain, and looked around. The forest was silent now, an eerie stillness settling over everything. The creatures were no longer growling or hissing, and the whispers had faded into a quiet murmur. It was almost as if the night itself was holding its breath. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in the distance, a shadow darker than the rest shifting through the trees. No, not just one. There were more. Erica's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. The creatures had surrounded her. They were closing in from every direction, their eyes glowing in the darkness like lanterns in a fog. There was no escape, Her mind raced, searching for any way out, any way to fight back. But the only thing she had was the stone, a crude, jagged object she had grabbed earlier. It wouldn't be enough. It couldn't be. "You cannot run," one of the creatures hissed, its voice carrying across the still air. "You are the one we need. You are the herald, the key." Erica's blood ran cold as the realization hit her like a physical blow. They weren't just hunting her. They were waiting for her, waiting for the final step of the ritual to be completed. The world had been awakened. Panic surged in her chest as she turned to face the creatures, the stone clenched tightly in her hand. They were closing in, their twisted forms moving with an unsettling grace, as if they were part of the darkness itself. Their hollow eyes stared at her with cold, unblinking intensity, their mouths opening wide in a silent scream that seemed to pierce the very air. She backed away, her thoughts a blur. She had no plan, no idea what to do. But then, through the panic, something strange happened. The whispers, the voices that had been taunting her, urging her to surrender, grew louder, more insistent. "You are the key," they repeated over and over, until the words felt like they were inside her skull, crawling beneath her skin. "The awakening is complete. The world is ours." And then, in that moment, something inside her snapped. Erica's body moved on its own, as if some primal instinct had taken over. She threw the stone at the nearest creature, the sharp edges catching the dim light as it hurtled through the air. The creature recoiled, hissing in pain as the stone struck its skull. But it didn't fall. It didn't even slow down. It simply kept coming. But Erica didn't stop. She didn't think. She ran. The forest had become a blur of shadows and motion. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, the terrain shifting in ways that felt unnatural. She could hear the creatures closing in, their movements growing faster, more erratic. She could feel their eyes on her, could feel their cold breath on her neck, but she didn't dare look back. The whispers were deafening now, their voices like a storm in her head. "You cannot escape," they screamed. "You belong to us. The world belongs to us." Erica's vision blurred as she pushed forward, her muscles burning, her lungs screaming for air. She could feel herself growing weaker with every step. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever, but she had to try. And then, just as the ground seemed to give way beneath her, she saw it, a flicker of light, a pale glow through the trees. It was faint, but it was enough. Hope surged within her as she darted toward it, her mind screaming for a way out. She reached the edge of the forest, where the trees finally thinned, and there, in the clearing, she saw the source of the light. A small cabin, barely visible through the thick mist that had begun to rise from the ground. It was old, weathered, and abandoned, but it was a place she could hide. A place she could barricade herself from the creatures. She stumbled toward it, her hands reaching for the door, but before she could touch the handle, a shadow lunged from the mist, crashing into her with the force of a tidal wave. She screamed as she was knocked to the ground, her body slamming against the earth with bone, jarring force. The creature loomed over her, its eyes glowing with malice as it grinned, its jagged teeth flashing in the moonlight. "It's over," it said, its voice a low growl. "You cannot escape. The ritual is complete." Erica's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled beneath the creature, its grip tightening on her arms, its claws digging into her skin. She fought back with everything she had, but it was no use. The creature was too strong, too powerful. And then, just as the darkness threatened to swallow her whole, a voice rang out from the cabin. "Leave her alone." Erica's heart skipped a beat when she heard the voice, a voice so clear and confident that it pierced through the overwhelming darkness. The creature above her hissed in frustration, its grip tightening around her arms as it growled in response. "Leave her alone!" The voice repeated, stronger now, as though emboldened by its own command. Erica's vision blurred from the pain, but she could see the creature hesitate for a brief moment, its glowing eyes flicking toward the source of the voice. It wasn't the pause of a creature that feared anything. It was more like a warning, a silent challenge between predator and prey. With a sudden surge of strength, Erica managed to twist free, her body slick with sweat and blood. The creature snarled and lunged forward, but before it could reach her, something emerged from the shadows. A figure. A man, tall and unshaken, stepped into the clearing, his silhouette defined by the dim glow from the cabin behind him. His presence was like a wall of force, standing between her and the creature as if daring it to try something. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice steady, but there was a sharpness to it that hinted at a deep, untold power. "She's under my protection." The creature recoiled at the man's words, its eyes narrowing with disdain. The air between them seemed to crackle, thick with tension. But the man stood his ground, unfazed. Erica, still on the ground, scrambled backward, her pulse racing in her ears. What was happening? Who was this person, and how did he know she needed help? The creature hissed again, a guttural sound that reverberated through the trees, but the man didn't flinch. He raised his hand, palm open, toward the creature. A pale, bluish light emanated from his fingers, swirling in the air like smoke, and for the first time since Erica had entered the forest, there was a moment of silence, a stillness that seemed to choke the very air. Then the creature moved. It lunged, but it didn't come for Erica this time. Instead, it collided with an invisible force, its body hitting an unseen barrier that sent it tumbling backward into the mist with an enraged screech. The man didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the creature's retreat. He simply turned to Erica, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race all over again. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone softer now, though still firm. Erica nodded quickly, though she couldn't find her voice. She was too stunned, too caught in the whirlwind of what had just happened. Her mind raced with questions, but there was one that stood out above the rest. Who are you?" she managed to croak out, her voice shaky. The man's expression softened for the briefest of moments, but then he turned his eyes back toward the mist, his stance never wavering. "Someone who's been watching you," he replied simply. "I know what you've been through." Erica, her breath caught in her throat. How did he know my name? Before she could ask another question, the man extended a hand to help her up, his fingers warm and solid. "I don't have much time," he said, his voice lowering. "Those things are not going to stop. They've already marked you, and the ritual has begun. You need to come with me. I can protect you, but you need to trust me." Erica stared at the man's hand, still unsure of what was happening. She felt the weight of his words settle over her like a thick fog, and she knew deep down that if she didn't leave with him now, there would be no chance of survival. The creatures were closing in, and she was running out of time. With a shaky breath, Erica reached out and took his hand. The moment her fingers brushed his, a surge of energy shot through her, as if she had been plugged into some unseen current. Her body stiffened, and for a fleeting moment, everything around her became clear, too clear. The trees, the sky, the darkness of the woods, the creature still lurking in the mist. It all came together like a puzzle piece slamming into place. And the truth hit her harder than anything she had ever known. The creatures, the whispers, the awakening, it was all connected. She was the key to something far bigger than she could understand. She wasn't just running from the creatures. They were hunting her because of what she represented. She was the doorway, the gateway, the bridge between worlds. The man seemed to sense her confusion, and he gave her a reassuring nod, though his eyes were filled with an unmistakable sadness. "There's no time for answers," he said, guiding her toward the cabin. "You'll understand soon enough. For now, we need to get inside and seal the door. Once the ritual is completed, the entire world will change, and nothing will be the same. Erica's mind was racing, but she didn't have time to argue. The creatures were still out there, circling, waiting for her next move. And she knew, deep down, that if she didn't follow this stranger into the cabin, there would be no escape. The man opened the door, revealing the cabin's dim interior. The air inside smelled old, musty, and faintly of smoke. Shadows danced on the walls from a single flickering candle. The place looked abandoned, yet there was something ancient about it, something sacred. He closed the door behind them with a heavy thud, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the man turned toward her, his face grim. "You need to stay quiet," he whispered. "They can hear everything, and right now, they're listening for us." The heavy door slammed shut behind them, and the silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on Erica's chest. She barely had time to process the stranger's words before he was moving swiftly around the small cabin, closing shutters and reinforcing the windows with wooden planks. Every action seemed deliberate, urgent, as though he was preparing for something far worse than what had already happened. Erica stood frozen, her mind racing. The cabin was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering candle placed on an old wooden table in the center of the room. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dampness, and the walls, covered in peeling wallpaper, seemed to groan under the weight of some unseen burden. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice steadier now, though her heart still pounded in her chest. "What's going on here?" The man didn't answer immediately. He finished securing the last of the windows, then turned to face her, his expression hard to read. He seemed tired, worn down by something, but his eyes, those dark eyes, were unwavering as they met hers. "I've been watching over you, Erica," he said again, his voice quiet but firm. "And I've been waiting for the right moment to intervene. But it's not about me anymore. It's about you." Her pulse quickened at his words. "About me?" He continued, his gaze distant now, like he was seeing something beyond the cabin walls. "The creatures in these woods, they've been drawn to you for a reason. And whatever this place is, whatever's happening, you're part of it. I can protect you, but only for so long." Erica swallowed hard. Her throat was dry, and her mind was struggling to make sense of everything that had happened in the last few hours. The creatures, the whispers, the strange pull she'd felt from the forest, it was all connected to her somehow. But how and why? "I don't understand," she murmured. "What's going on? What do they want with me?" The man sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as if the weight of the situation was too much to bear. "It's hard to explain," he said slowly. "But the creatures, the ones hunting you, they're not from this world. They were sent here. And they're not just after you. They're after what's inside you." Erica felt a chill crawl down her spine. "What's inside me?" He met her gaze again, his eyes dark and filled with a mixture of sorrow and urgency. "I can't explain it all right now, but you're the key. You're the one who can stop this or let it happen." Before Erica could ask him more, a loud bang echoed from the woods outside. A deep, reverberating thud that shook the very foundation of the cabin. The man froze, his eyes snapping to the door, as if he could sense something out there. His hand went to the knife at his belt, and he slowly approached the door. Erica's breath caught in her throat. She could feel it too, the undeniable presence of something moving just outside. She wasn't alone. And whatever it was getting closer. "They've found us," the man said, his voice grim. He moved toward the small fireplace in the corner of the cabin and began to gather logs. "We don't have much time." "Who are they?" Erica whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "They're the ones who will come for you." The ones who want to use you to open the door. The door. She didn't understand. The door to what? What was he talking about? But before she could ask more, another sound came. A low, guttural growl, closer now, emanating from just outside the cabin. The man finished gathering the wood and dropped it into the fireplace, striking a match with practiced precision. The flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow across the room. But the warmth did little to ease Erica's mounting fear. The man's gaze flicked toward the door again, his hand tightening around the hilt of the knife. "We need to make sure the door stays sealed. If they get inside..." He didn't finish the sentence. The implications were clear. Erica's mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. The door. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of her unknown role pressing down on her. What door? And why did these creatures want her so badly? Another loud bang. This time, the door shuddered in its frame, as if something immense had just collided with it from the outside. "They're here," the man said. He looked at Erica, his expression hardening. "Get behind me." Before she could respond, the door flew open with a deafening crash. The creature from the woods stood in the doorway, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto Erica with an intensity that sent a jolt of terror through her body. It was larger than before, its form more defined now, with jagged scales covering its skin and elongated claws that scraped against the wooden floor as it advanced. Behind it, several more figures. Creatures similar to the one in the doorway loomed in the shadows, their eyes glowing with hunger. The man didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, brandishing the knife with skill and confidence. "Stay back," he warned, his voice cold and unwavering. The creature hesitated for a moment, but then, with a hiss, it lunged. The man moved faster than Erica could track, slashing the knife through the air with deadly precision. The blade struck the creature's arm, but it barely seemed to register the injury. The creature's eyes flashed with rage, and it swiped at him with a clawed hand. Erica's heart raced as the scene unfolded in front of her, but she didn't know what to do. She couldn't just stand there and watch. This man had come to protect her, and now he was fighting to keep her alive. "Get to the back!" he shouted. His voice strained as he blocked another attack. "Go now." Erica didn't hesitate. She turned and bolted toward the back of the cabin, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, but one thing was clear: she couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Not anymore. The door slammed shut behind her as she reached the back room, and she pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The sounds of the struggle filled the air. The clash of metal against monstrous flesh, the screeches of the creatures, the man's grunts of effort. She closed her eyes, willing herself to be strong. She couldn't let this man die, not after everything he'd done for her. She had to do something, anything. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the front room. The door was breached. Her heart skipped a beat. They're inside. The sounds from the front room grew louder. Erica could hear the man's voice, faint but unmistakable, fighting to hold back the creatures. The sound of claws scraping against the wood, the swish of something large and dangerous moving through the space, and the heavy thuds of impacts from the creatures' strikes. It all blended into a cacophony of chaos, sending a shiver through her spine. She pressed herself deeper into the corner of the back room, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, suffocating her. The man had been clear. She couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. But what was she supposed to do? What could she do? The creatures were relentless. Their guttural growls and screeches echoed through the cabin, and Erica's heart raced in fear. She didn't know how much longer the man could hold them off. If he couldn't protect her, if he couldn't stop them. Then what? A deep crash sounded from the front room, followed by a terrible screech. Erica's breath hitched in her throat. It wasn't just the creatures. Something else was happening. She could feel it, a growing pressure that made her skin prickle. The air felt different, heavier. Her eyes darted around the small back room, looking for anything that could help. The walls were lined with old, forgotten furniture, dusty chairs, a rusted lamp, a cracked mirror. There had to be something, anything. Then, her gaze landed on a strange, dark shape in the corner, partially hidden behind a faded armchair. She moved toward it instinctively, her pulse quickening. It was a small wooden chest, weathered and old, with strange markings carved into its surface. The symbols were unfamiliar, but there was something about them that felt important. Without thinking, she crouched down and opened the chest. Inside was a collection of old trinkets, a few tarnished coins, a bundle of frayed rope, and an ancient-looking book with a faded leather cover. The book was different from the rest. Its pages slightly yellowed, its edges frayed with age. As Erica pulled it out, a sense of foreboding washed over her. She couldn't explain it, but something about the book felt alive, like it had a purpose, and that purpose was tied to her. A loud, violent crash echoed from the front room, followed by a roar of pain. Erica's heart skipped. She needed to act, and fast. With trembling hands, she flipped open the book, her eyes scanning the first few pages. The writing was in an old script she didn't recognize, but something about it seemed to resonate deep inside her. There was power in those words, power that was calling to her. As she turned the pages, her fingers stopped at a diagram, an intricate drawing of a door, surrounded by swirling symbols. The same symbols that had been carved into the chest. Erica's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the door. She scanned the text beneath the drawing, her mind trying to piece together what it all meant. The words seemed to speak directly to her, pulling her in. The door that binds, the door that opens, the door that seals. Within lies the power to choose. The blood of the chosen will determine the fate of the world. Erica's hand shook as she read the final sentence. If the door is opened, the world will change. But if it remains sealed, the darkness will spread, unchecked, until all is lost. A cold sweat broke out across her skin. She didn't understand it fully, but she understood enough. She was the chosen one, and this door, this thing inside her, was what the creatures were after. And now, it seemed that the only way to stop it all was to make a choice. Do I open it? She whispered aloud, her voice barely more than a breath. Or do I seal it? The sound of scraping metal pulled her from her thoughts. The creatures were close, closer than ever. She glanced at the book again. There was no time left to hesitate. Her fingers traced the strange symbols on the page, her mind racing. If she opened the door, there was no turning back. But if she sealed it, would the creatures be able to find another way? Would she be able to live with herself, knowing the darkness could still spread? The cabin door cracked open, and Erica could hear the growls from just outside. They were coming for her, coming for the power within her. Her hands moved instinctively, flipping the pages back and forth. Then, she found it, the final part of the ritual. She could either unlock the door, unleashing whatever was beyond it, or she could seal it, trapping the creatures in the void forever. The decision was hers, and it had to be made now. With trembling hands, Erica closed her eyes and whispered the words from the book, her voice shaky but determined. I choose. The air inside the cabin grew thick, suffocating, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation. Erica stood frozen, her body tense, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The words she had spoken hung in the air like a heavy fog, and she could feel their weight, their power. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. The creatures outside let out a deafening roar. Their gnashing teeth and frenzied movements shook the very foundation of the cabin. The man, who had been fighting to protect her, was no longer heard. There was only silence now, a silence that screamed louder than the chaos before. Erica's hand trembled as she closed the book. The dark symbols on the pages seemed to burn into her palms, leaving an imprint of dread. She had made the choice, and now she had to face the consequences. The book's binding creaked as if in response to her decision, and the chest in the corner seemed to shudder. Something was happening, something alive. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air grew even colder, swirling around her in unnatural gusts. A low hum began, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily louder, vibrating through her bones. The noise reverberated off the walls, filling her ears with a maddening buzz. The room began to darken, the corners of her vision blurring with shadow. It felt like the very fabric of reality was starting to tear. And then she saw it. The door. At first, it was only a shadow, a vague shape in the air, half-formed, like a doorway that had been pulled from another dimension. The symbols from the book flared to life on the door's surface, glowing with a faint, eerie light. The symbols twisted and writhed, as though they were trying to escape, trying to break free from the boundaries of the page and into the world. Erica's pulse raced as the door expanded, widening, taking shape. Her mind reeled. She didn't know what would come through it if she opened it, but whatever it was tied to her decision, to her blood, to her fate. But the creatures, they were still out there, and they were closing in. If she didn't do something now, they would overrun her. She could hear their claws scraping against the cabin walls, scratching, clawing, getting closer. The door flickered, shimmering like a mirage, and then it opened. A gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it a sharp, bitter cold that cut through Erica's clothes, making her shiver violently. The door revealed nothing but an abyss, a yawning, black void that seemed to stretch infinitely into nothingness. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, an energy that made Erica's heart race in panic. It was pulling at her, calling to her, tempting her to step inside. The creatures were almost at the door. She could hear their growls, their frantic movements. She had no time left. Was this the right choice? She asked herself, her thoughts muddled. Did opening this door mean salvation or damnation? Erica reached forward, her hand shaking, as she placed her palm against the door. The instant her skin made contact with the cold surface, a surge of power shot through her, jolting her entire body. A vision flashed before her eyes. She saw the creatures then. They weren't from this world, not truly. Their forms were twisted, fluid, like shadows taking shape. They had been bound to this realm for centuries, imprisoned by the ancient power of the door. But now, they were free. The seals had been broken. Erica gasped, pulling her hand away as the vision faded. No, she couldn't let them through. Not like this. But she couldn't close the door either. In that moment of desperation, something else emerged from the void, a figure. Tall, shadowed, with an unnatural presence. It stepped through the door. No, it wasn't walking, it was floating. A being of pure darkness, its features obscured by the swirling shadows that made up its form. It looked at her, its eyes two pinpricks of light in the vast darkness, watching her with an unsettling calm. Erica's heart raced. What was it? And then, a voice, not from the figure, but from the air around her, a whisper that seemed to echo from every direction. You have opened the door, chosen one. And now, you must choose again. Erica swallowed hard, fear paralyzing her. Choose again? The figure's voice was cold, yet strangely alluring. The power you hold is greater than you can understand. You've unlocked the door, but the decision is not over. To save yourself, to save this world, you must choose. A chill ran down her spine, and the creatures outside grew more frantic, their roars and howls more desperate. Erica's mind raced. What was this being? Why was it here? And what did it want from her? You must decide, the voice echoed. Will you open it completely and unleash the creatures, or will you close it, sealing them away and taking your chances with the unknown? Erica's mind whirled. Her breath quickened. There was so much at stake, so much uncertainty. The creatures, the figure, the darkness beyond the door, it was all tied to this single moment, to her next decision. There was no going back. The door had opened, but the world wasn't yet lost. With every second that passed, the decision loomed larger. The air was thick with tension, heavy and suffocating. Erica's mind raced, torn between the two impossible choices that the shadowy figure presented. She could feel the weight of the decision, pressing down on her like a crushing force. The creatures outside were closing in, their ferocious growls echoing through the cabin. But the figure, the thing, was standing before her, waiting for her response. The voice, distant yet omnipresent, continued to reverberate in her ears. The door can be closed, and the creatures will remain bound, but the price will be yours. Or you can open it completely and unleash them into the world. The consequences will be far-reaching, far worse than you can imagine. The door behind her pulsed with an eerie glow, the symbols that adorned it swirling as if alive, drawing her attention. She glanced at the dark figure that hovered just beyond it, the cold presence seeming to engulf the entire cabin. Its eyes, glowing like two tiny stars in the blackness, reminded her of something ancient, something forgotten. Erica swallowed hard, struggling to maintain control over her breathing. She had never felt so alone in her life. The storm that had raged outside for hours seemed like a mere whisper compared to the storm now brewing within her. It was as if time itself had stopped, the weight of her choices holding the universe in suspense. What was the right decision? To close the door, to seal away the darkness forever? It seemed like the logical choice. She'd have to pay a price, that much was clear, but the creatures, they would be contained. She could survive. They would be locked away. The world could go back to its natural order, and the nightmares would be over. But the figure had made it clear. The unknown was just as dangerous, if not more so. She looked at the glowing symbols on the door once more, their swirling motion almost hypnotic. Behind her, the creatures howled again, but this time there was something different. There was a note of desperation in their voices, a raw, primal fear. Could they be afraid of what the door could unleash? Was this darkness something even they feared? You're afraid, she whispered to herself, the words coming out almost involuntarily. You're afraid of what happens if I choose to open it. The figure's voice answered, dark and knowing, afraid. No, but you should be. Her thoughts spiraled. She could feel herself slipping into the very fear that had driven her here. What if she wasn't strong enough to face whatever was on the other side of the door? What if the price for closing it was too high? What was she willing to sacrifice to save herself? Her body trembled as she stepped closer to the door, her mind a battlefield. Every step felt like a lifetime. She could see her reflection in the door now, her pale face staring back at her, wide-eyed, a reflection of the fear that had taken root deep inside her soul. The figure moved, a ripple in the air, its voice soft, coaxing. What will you do, Erica? The choice is yours, your life or the world's. Her hand hovered over the door's surface. It was cold, so cold. Almost unbearably so. I can't, she began, but the words died in her throat. She wanted to believe that she could close the door, lock it away, and somehow live through the consequences. She wanted to believe that this nightmare could end. But deep down, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. Don't you see? The figure's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. It is not just you who will suffer. It is everyone who has ever lived. Every soul on this earth. You've opened the door, and in doing so, You've triggered a chain of events that cannot be undone. There is no running from it. Erica's stomach churned, her head spinning. The creatures outside were still growing more frantic, their sounds of scratching, gnashing, and wailing filling the room with an overwhelming noise. But there was something else, a sound that was faint but growing louder. A door opening. Another door. Erica turned her head, eyes wide, as the sound came from within the room. A low creak, followed by a slow, deliberate groan, as though something within the cabin was awakening, something she had not noticed before. The chest in the corner of the room, the one she had left untouched, began to shudder, as though it, too, was reacting to the door. The air around it began to pulse, the shadows in the corners of the cabin swirling in response. Erica took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife in her bag. But there was no time for that. The chest, what was in it? What had she missed? Her breath caught in her throat as the chest's lid began to lift. The shadows inside seemed to leak out, swirling in a dark cloud, a mass of intangible terror. As the lid creaked open, Erica stepped back further, her pulse hammering. Then she saw it. A face. It was not human. It was not even alive, not truly. It was pale, ghostly, with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to stare directly into her soul. Its mouth was open, but no sound came from it. The figure inside the chest seemed to be beckoning to her, as if calling her name, though she knew she had never seen it before. Suddenly, the door behind her began to vibrate, the symbols on it flaring brighter, and a voice, deep, guttural, and ancient, boomed from the void beyond the door. The choice is made. Erica's breath hitched. She realized with a shock that her hand was already on the door, her fingers inching closer to the symbols. She had to make the choice, now. The world seemed to freeze for a moment, as if the very fabric of reality was holding its breath, waiting for Erica's next move. The face from the chest still hovered in her mind, its hollow eyes drilling into her consciousness. It was as though it was calling her, pulling her deeper into the shadows. The words echoed in her ears, "The choice is made." Her hand trembled, inches away from the door. The weight of the decision, of the promise or curse that lay behind it, pressed down on her like a boulder. Everything she had endured in this cursed place, the creatures outside, the things that had been unleashed by their very presence, it all led to this moment. There was no turning back now, but her mind was a storm. Was it even truly a choice? She had already crossed the threshold. Everything around her was crumbling. The dark figure still stood at the edge of her vision, as if it were waiting, knowing that the time for deliberation had passed. The air itself seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, a force she couldn't understand. The figure's form began to fade into the shadows, as though it was becoming one with them. Erica's fingers brushed the surface of the door. It was cold, unnaturally cold. A feeling deep within her, instinct, or maybe something more, told her that opening it was the wrong thing to do. But closing it, what would be the cost? Would she, too, become another prisoner of the shadows? Or would she suffer for the rest of her life, knowing that she had chosen the wrong path? A low growl, familiar but filled with something new, something darker, rumbled from the creatures outside the cabin. The sounds grew louder, more frantic, as though they were losing their patience. They were close, too close. But something else was different now. The ground beneath her feet was shaking, as if the earth itself had begun to tremble in anticipation of what was to come. Erica's breath caught in her throat. She turned around and stared at the chest again. It wasn't just the face staring back at her now. It was something more, something alive. The figure inside the chest seemed to stretch, its mouth opening wider, and then, like a whispered secret, its voice slithered into her mind. "Let me out." Her eyes widened. The sound of its voice was as cold as death, yet it carried with it an undeniable pull, a promise. The thing in the chest wanted to be freed, and in some twisted way, it felt like the right thing to do. But why? Was she becoming mad? Was it her desperation talking? The pulsing from the door grew louder now, more insistent. She could feel the symbols shifting under her fingertips as if they were alive, as though the door itself was beckoning her to open it. "No," Erica whispered. "I can't." But her hand didn't move away. Her fingers tightened around the handle, almost involuntarily. It felt as though something deep inside her was urging her to give in, to release whatever was on the other side. There was an undeniable pull, a magnetic force that made her heart race. And then she heard it again, the voice from the chest. "Do it, Erica. Open it. I will grant you a choice." A shiver ran down her spine. The promise was tempting, too tempting. What could it offer? What was behind the door? The questions swirled in her mind like a maelstrom, and for a moment she stood there, frozen, lost in the possibility. The creatures were no longer scratching at the door. They were quiet now, waiting. It was as though they knew something that she didn't. The absence of their usual chaotic sounds unsettled her even more. The figure, the thing, was no longer standing in the corner. It was standing directly behind her now. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating. She could feel its cold breath on her neck, and the weight of its gaze pressing into her very soul. "The decision has been made, Erica," the figure said, its voice now a soft murmur. "All that remains is for you to see it through. The creatures, the abyss, everything that you have feared, it is already in motion." She could hear it now. Soft whispers, almost imperceptible, coming from the cracks in the door. The voices on the other side were not just growls and howls anymore. They were words, muted, distorted, but unmistakable. Erica's heart skipped a beat. "Open the door and you will see." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a command. It was an inevitability. The words pressed into her mind, suffocating her thoughts, drowning out everything else. She felt her fingers curl around the door handle once more. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had no choice. She had made her decision. Or maybe it had already been made for her. The door groaned as it slowly, reluctantly, began to open. The door creaked open, its sound like the final exhale of a dying breath. The air shifted, cold, heavy, and filled with an almost tangible sense of dread. For a split second, everything in the cabin felt like it was suspended in time, as if the world had paused to witness what would happen next. And then, it came. A blast of frigid air rushed through the gap, like the exhale of something ancient and vast, as if the door had opened to a realm that had been locked away for centuries. The floorboards beneath Erica's feet groaned. Under the pressure, a low, resonant hum filling the space around her. The light inside the cabin flickered for a moment, and shadows twisted in strange, unnatural ways, reaching out like dark fingers grasping for her. A ripple of sound, a whisper, perhaps the most chilling thing she'd ever heard, swept across the room. It was not a word, but a sensation. A hum in the air that reverberated deep in her bones. "Come closer." The voice was not a sound, but a vibration that rattled her chest, coaxing her, urging her forward. It felt wrong. It felt like everything inside her should resist. But the pull was too strong. She had crossed a line. The decision, whatever it had been, was no longer hers. It had taken on a life of its own. The figure, the thing, behind her, its shadow stretching against the wall, seemed to lean forward as though it, too, was curious to see what lay beyond the door. Erica took a hesitant step toward the doorway, but her body was stiff, her mind fighting against the magnetic force pulling her closer. The creatures outside had fallen silent, and the stillness was even more terrifying. They knew. They had known this moment would come. There was no more running. Her breath caught as she crossed the threshold. The air beyond the door even colder. It wasn't just the temperature, it felt as if reality itself had bent, as if she were stepping into a place where time and space no longer made sense. The world outside the cabin faded behind her, swallowed by a void that pressed in from all sides. As her foot crossed the line between the cabin and the unknown, a sudden crack echoed through the air, like thunder breaking in the sky. The world shuddered. This was it. Erica's hand shot out, reaching for the frame of the door as if to anchor herself. Her fingers brushed against the edges, but they were no longer solid. Instead, they felt like they were touching something fluid, something that rippled under her touch, sending a wave of nausea crashing through her. She yanked her hand back in alarm, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind her with an ear-splitting crack. The sound of the hinges breaking rang out in the silence, like a scream. Her heart raced as the world around her shifted once more. There was no turning back now. There was no door. No way to return to what was left of the cabin. It had all vanished, swallowed by the abyss she had just entered. Before her stood a vast, endless expanse, stretching out in all directions. The sky above was a swirling mix of inky black clouds and bleeding reds, as though the heavens themselves were weeping. The ground beneath her was barren, cracked and lifeless, as though it had been abandoned by everything that had once lived there. The air smelled of decay, of something ancient and forgotten. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, like thousands of unseen eyes were fixed on her every move. Where was she? Erica stumbled forward, disoriented, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear whispers, not from the chest, not from the door, but from all around her. The voices were everywhere, swirling in the wind, indistinct yet strangely familiar. They were the same whispers she had heard earlier, the same haunting, suffocating sound that had plagued her thoughts since the moment she first set foot in the woods. "You've come?" The voice from behind her, the figure, spoke again. But this time it wasn't just one voice, it was many. All around her, a chorus of voices hummed, their words blending together into a single, terrible sentence. "You've opened the path." Her stomach churned. What had she done? She had no answers, no explanations. Only the gnawing fear that this was the end. But there was no time to dwell on that now. She could feel it. Something was moving, something out there. The ground trembled underfoot, a low, guttural rumble that seemed to come from deep beneath the earth. She could hear the creatures again, but their growls had changed. They were no longer the same. This was different. They were louder, closer, more insistent. Something was rising. She had to move. She couldn't stand still, not with this thing looming. This ancient terror that had been set loose by her very actions. But where could she run? There was nowhere to go. This was not a place of escape. This was a place where things came to end. And then, from the distance, she saw it. A figure, towering, impossibly tall, a silhouette against the swirling chaos. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything she could understand. It was ancient, a being born of shadows, its form indistinct, constantly shifting. It was moving toward her, its massive steps causing the ground to quake. It was the true force behind everything. The creature's eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with a piercing light, a fire that burned with an unnatural intensity. The moment their gazes locked, Erica felt her body freeze. Her pulse stopped, her breath halted. It was as though she were being drawn into its very being, its endless void. And then, the voice, "You have arrived. Welcome home." The ground shook beneath her, each tremor a cruel reminder that escape was no longer an option. The towering figure before her was closing in, its massive, shifting form impossible to comprehend. The very air seemed to bend around it, warping reality as it approached, and for the first time, Erica understood the full extent of the terror she had unleashed. She wanted to move, to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place by the sheer weight of the entity's gaze. The eyes, those glowing, burning orbs, were not just eyes. They were like windows into a vast, endless void. A place where light and dark no longer mattered, where the very essence of existence twisted into something unrecognizable. The voice that echoed from its depths was 1,000 whispers, layered on top of each other, like the collective thoughts of 1,000,000 souls speaking at once. You are here. It was not a question. It was a statement, one that pierced her very core. You have crossed the line. You have invited the storm. The words sent a cold shiver down Erica's spine. She had crossed the line. She had opened the door. But what had she let in? A deep, guttural rumble rose from the creature's chest, and with it came the sense that everything around her was beginning to unravel. The world seemed to fray at the edges, the cracks in reality widening, as though the fabric of existence itself was being torn apart. And then, without warning, the creature lunged. Its movements were impossibly fast, its enormous limbs sweeping through the air like tendrils of darkness. The ground cracked beneath its weight, and the very sky above seemed to darken, suffocating under the pressure of its presence. Erica's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, as if the terror of the creature had seeped into her very being, freezing her from the inside out. The creature's shadow loomed over her, an oppressive, suffocating darkness that seemed to blot out all light. Its mouth, a gaping maw that stretched wide, opened, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. The stench of decay and death wafted toward her, and the sound of its breath, slow and heavy, filled the air like 1,000 drums beating in unison. But as its maw neared her, something changed. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and a sudden wind whipped through the barren landscape, lifting her hair and clothing, sending a chill straight through her bones. She gasped for air, her chest tight as if she were suffocating. The creature paused. It stopped just inches away from her, its massive, glowing eyes boring into her soul. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Erica's pulse thundered in her ears, her thoughts racing, her mind scrambling for some way out, some way to survive. And then it spoke again. Its voice not coming from its mouth, but from everywhere. From the air, from the ground, from inside her own mind. You cannot escape. The words were a death sentence. It was the final truth, the inescapable reality. Erica had crossed into a place where time no longer held sway, where escape was an illusion, and where the horrors she had unleashed would forever be bound to her soul. She closed her eyes, her breath shallow, but even then, she could feel the creature's presence pressing against her, its hunger growing with each passing second. The weight of its gaze was unbearable. She had no way out, no way to undo the mistake she had made. But then, as if on cue, the ground beneath her began to shift again. This time it was not the same rumbling she had felt before. It was a pulse, a deep, resonant thrum that echoed through her chest. The earth trembled as something deep below the surface stirred, something ancient and powerful. The creature let out a low, almost curious sound as it looked around, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. It seemed to sense it too, the pulse, the dark force that had been stirred. A new presence, even more powerful than the creature itself, was rising from the depths. Erica's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel it. Something was about to change. She didn't know if it was a new threat or something else entirely, but she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The creature hissed, its jagged teeth flashing in the dim light. It was no longer focused on her. Its attention was elsewhere. It seemed to be retreating, stepping back, its massive form retreating into the darkness, leaving Erica standing alone in the heart of the abyss. And then, as quickly as it had come, the creature vanished, swallowed up by the ever-growing darkness that surrounded her. The pulse continued to echo through the air, stronger now, like the beating of a heart, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. Erica was left standing there, alone, the oppressive weight of the world pressing down on her. She had no idea what was coming next, only that she was no longer in control. The darkness was closing in, and she was about to face something far worse than she could ever have imagined. And in the distance, a figure appeared. It was small at first, but it grew larger with every blink, until it stood before her, bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The figure was like nothing she had ever seen, its form shifting, flickering, as if it were made of smoke and shadows. It spoke, its voice cold and distant. "You have opened the door. Now, you must face the consequences." The moon was nearly full as it bathed the woods in an eerie, silvery glow. But for Samantha and Ethan, the beauty of the night was long forgotten. The air had thickened, heavy with the sense of something unnatural lingering, just beyond their sight. The entity, the one that had hunted them through every corner of the forest, was no longer just a thing they could run from. It had become a presence, an undeniable force that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. "We can't keep going like this," Samantha said, her voice hoarse, her body drained from the endless running. It's like it knows where we're going before we even move." Ethan glanced at her, his face pale and wary. He didn't speak, but his silence said it all. He was no longer convinced they could escape. The sense of hopelessness had taken root deep within him, just as it had for her. Every path they took led them in circles. Every attempt to find shelter had been futile. The woods twisted with a sinister intelligence, guiding them into its grasp. "It's coming," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "I can feel it, Sam. It's in my head." Samantha wanted to argue, to offer some words of hope, but she couldn't. She felt it too. The weight of the thing that had been following them. The cold, unnerving presence that seemed to know their every thought was becoming unbearable. Suddenly, the flashlight in Samantha's hand flickered. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. And then it came back to life, but the beam shone weaker, as though it, too, was succumbing to the overwhelming force surrounding them. The trees loomed taller, more menacing, their gnarled branches reaching toward them like claws. "Sam," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look." Samantha followed his gaze, and her heart skipped a beat. In the distance, between the shadows of the trees, she saw it. The figure. The one that had appeared in flashes throughout their ordeal. It stood still, watching them unmoving. At first, she thought it was just another hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion. But the figure stepped forward, its movement unnatural, jerky. It was humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its body contorted in ways that defied logic. "That's it," Ethan said, his voice barely audible now. "That's the thing. It's not just following us anymore. It's leading us somewhere." Samantha's blood ran cold. This was no longer a chase. It was a game, a cruel, twisted game in which they were the prey. "We'll have to go," Samantha urged, pulling Ethan's arm, but he hesitated. "Where to?" he asked, voice breaking. "It's everywhere. We're trapped, Sam." Before she could answer, a horrible screech ripped through the night, sending a chill up their spines. It came from behind them, from deep within the woods, but it was joined by another sound. A whisper. Soft and unintelligible, like 1,000 voices speaking all at once. The forest seemed to close in around them, and the space between the trees grew impossibly narrow. The figure moved again, its silhouette growing larger, its presence more oppressive. With every step it took, the forest seemed to warp, its edges blurring as if reality itself was bending under the weight of its power. "Ethan." Samantha's voice faltered as she backed away, but her body refused to move. Her legs were frozen in place, and then, in a voice colder than the night air, the figure spoke. "You've come too far, now." The words felt like ice stabbing into her chest. She tried to scream, to run, but the air around her seemed to thicken, suffocating her. Ethan, still beside her, was trembling. Sam, we can't escape. We have to face it. We have no other choice. Samantha's heart raced as she felt the weight of the situation crash down on her. The figure was no longer just an apparition. It was real, and it was powerful. The darkness that had been following them now seemed to feed on their fear, growing stronger with every passing second. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't." But as she looked into Ethan's eyes, she saw the same realization. They were out of options. The figure took another step forward, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight like mirrors reflecting their own terror. "You should have never come here." Before either of them could react, the world around them seemed to twist. The trees blurred into shadows, and the earth beneath their feet seemed to vanish. They were falling, plunging into an abyss of darkness, a place beyond time and space. The entity's laughter echoed in their ears as they disappeared into the void. The fall felt endless. Time bent and twisted, the seconds stretching into what seemed like hours. The dark abyss swallowed them whole, but there was no impact, no sensation of crashing into the ground. Just a sensation of falling, suspended in an inescapable void. It was as if they were trapped between the worlds, neither here nor there. Samantha reached out instinctively, grabbing for anything, but her fingers found nothing. She screamed, her voice lost to the void, her words swallowed by the endless blackness. Ethan was beside her, though he was just a faint shape in the dark, his outline barely visible in the suffocating blackness. Suddenly, everything stopped. The stillness was profound, like a heavy blanket pressing down on her chest. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the ground beneath them, though unseen, was solid. They were no longer falling, but the void around them felt more oppressive than before. "What is this?" Samantha whispered, her voice trembling. She tried to move, but her body felt weighted, sluggish. "Where are we?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was staring ahead, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and something else, recognition. Slowly, he took a step forward, as if drawn by an invisible force. "Samantha, do you hear that?" he said, his voice low, almost reverent. She paused, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but the pounding of her heart in her ears. But then, as though the void itself was speaking, she heard it, the same whispering voices. Hundreds of them overlapping indistinct. A cacophony of unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The words, though still a jumble, began to take shape in her mind. They were speaking of the game, the entity, and the rules. Rules that were too twisted to understand, too warped to be real. "This isn't real," Samantha muttered to herself, trying to push back the growing sense of dread. "This can't be real." But, as she spoke, the darkness around them seemed to shift, and the air thickened with something malevolent. From the shadows ahead, the figure emerged once again. It was different now. No longer the distant presence it had been before. It stood tall before them, its form more defined, more solid. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. Its limbs twisted in grotesque angles. It wasn't just a specter, it was an embodiment of the nightmare that had hunted them for so long. "You've come this far," the figure said, its voice a low, distorted growl. "Now, you will play by my rules." Samantha's pulse quickened. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice rising with a mix of defiance and fear. The figure cocked its head as if considering her words. "I've already told you," it said slowly. "You've crossed into my realm. You cannot escape the rules of the game." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What game?" The figure's smile stretched wider, more predatory. "The game of survival. It's a simple game. Really, you run. I chase. But there's one rule you must understand. No one leaves the game once it's begun. Not alive." Samantha felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. "No," she shouted, stepping forward, though her legs felt heavy. "We didn't sign up for this!" We didn't choose this! You always had a choice, the figure replied. But now it's too late. The game is over when I say it is. Without warning, the ground beneath them began to shift, as if the very earth was alive. The landscape around them morphed, changing into something they couldn't understand, a twisted, desolate version of the forest. The trees were skeletal, their branches reaching like hands desperate for their souls. Run, the figure said, its voice a low hiss, or you will be trapped here forever. Samantha and Ethan didn't need to be told twice. They turned and ran, their feet pounding on the uneven ground, but the woods seemed endless, stretching on without end. The whispers followed them, closer now, pressing in on them from all sides. Samantha, we can't outrun it. Ethan gasped, his voice ragged.
It's everywhere!
Samantha's heart was pounding in her chest, and the cold air felt like it was freezing her to the bone. We have to find a way to end this, she said, though she didn't know how. The entity had made its rules clear. It would never stop hunting them. Never stop twisting reality until they gave in. But as they stumbled through the nightmare landscape, a thought began to take root in Samantha's mind. A chilling realization. We can't outrun it, she said quietly, turning to Ethan. But maybe we don't have to. Ethan looked at her in confusion. What are you talking about? Maybe the way out isn't to run. Maybe it's to face it, to break the rules. We're not just its prey. We're part of this game. And if we play by its rules, we lose. But if we break them, maybe we can destroy it. Ethan's eyes widened with realization. You're saying we fight back. Exactly, Samantha said, though she didn't feel sure of her words. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the only choice. The entity had controlled them for so long. But now, they had nothing left to lose. As the whispers grew louder, the figure looming ever closer, Samantha felt something stir within her. Something dark, something that hadn't been there before. But now, in this moment, she understood. The game was over. It was time to take control. Samantha's heart raced as the forest closed in around them. The trees seemed to whisper, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the entity's presence. It was drawing closer, its form barely visible among the shadows, but its presence was undeniable. Every inch of this place seemed designed to trap them, to twist their perceptions, to keep them running, forever lost in a nightmare of their own making. Ethan, barely able to keep his footing, stumbled beside her, his face pale. We can't keep doing this, he said, his voice hoarse. We'll never outrun it. Samantha didn't answer. She had heard his words, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking of the game, the rules the entity had set in motion. It was a game of survival, yes, but one that had always favored the hunter. They had been its prey from the start, nothing more than pawns in a twisted game. But what if they could break those rules? What if they could turn the tables? She stopped abruptly, her feet digging into the earth, causing Ethan to stumble and crash into her. Samantha, what are you doing? He gasped, his hands gripping her shoulders. We can't keep running, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. We have to stand our ground. Ethan looked around them, panic rising in his eyes.
Are you crazy? It's going to kill us!
No, Samantha replied, her gaze sharp. It won't, not if we fight back. She could feel the ground shift beneath her, as if the world itself was reacting to her words, to her defiance. The whispers had grown louder, closer now, each word a promise of doom, but they didn't faze her. Instead, she focused, breathing deeply, her mind racing. The entity's form emerged from the shadows, its twisted, distorted limbs slithering out like dark tendrils. Its eyes, glowing with malice, fixed on Samantha and Ethan. There was no pity in them, no hesitation, just the cold, hungry certainty of a predator. It took a step toward them, the ground trembling with each movement. You're running out of time, it intoned, its voice a low rumble that seemed to echo in their very bones. "You cannot escape." Samantha stood tall, despite the fear crawling under her skin. "We're not trying to escape," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're going to stop you." The entity paused, its form flickering in the shadows as if it hadn't expected this. For a brief moment, it seemed uncertain. "You think you can stop me?" it asked, its voice mocking. "You're just two players in a game you cannot win." Samantha felt the weight of its words, but it didn't matter anymore. The fear that had paralyzed her for so long had burned away, replaced by something sharper. Something she couldn't explain, but something that felt like power. A dark, instinctive understanding of the game's rules and how they could be bent, twisted, or even broken. "Yes," she said simply, as if the answer was already decided. "We can." She stepped forward, her hand reaching into the shadows, as if pulling something from the very air itself. The darkness around them writhed and shifted, responding to her command, shaping itself into something new. The figure shrank back slightly, as if startled by her sudden defiance. "You cannot manipulate me," it hissed, its eyes narrowing. "You cannot change the game." "We'll see about that," Samantha muttered under her breath, and with that, she released the darkness in her hand, sending it surging toward the entity. The shadow coiled and snapped like a whip, striking at the twisted form that loomed before them. For a moment, the entity seemed taken aback, its form flickering and distorting, as though the darkness had disrupted its very essence. Then, with a screech of fury, it recoiled, its distorted limbs flailing wildly. "You cannot control me!" it howled, its voice now a guttural growl, filled with rage. But Samantha could feel it now, the power that surged within her. The power that had been there all along, waiting for her to unlock it. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to end this, to free them both from the nightmare the entity had crafted. The shadows swirled around her like a storm, wrapping her in their cold embrace. But she didn't fear them. She welcomed them, used them to fuel her will. The entity's screams echoed in the darkness, but it couldn't fight against the power that Samantha had harnessed. With every breath, she pulled more of the void to her, twisting its essence, shaping it into a force that defied the very rules of the game. "I said, we're done playing," Samantha whispered, and the words were more than a declaration. They were a command. With a final, resounding crack, the shadows erupted around them, engulfing the entity in a rush of cold, suffocating darkness. It struggled, but its form faltered, its twisted limbs writhing helplessly as the darkness consumed it whole. For a moment, everything went still. The air cleared, and the forest around them began to fade, the twisted trees crumbling into nothingness. The ground beneath their feet softened, returning to its natural state. The whispers that had plagued them were gone, replaced by the eerie silence of a world freed from the grip of the entity. Samantha and Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the space where the entity had once been. There was no sign of it now, no shadow, no trace of its malignant presence. The game had ended. For the first time in what felt like forever, Samantha allowed herself to breathe. She looked at Ethan, her gaze searching for any sign of fear, but there was none. He was as stunned as she was, but he was alive, and so was she. They had won. But as the silence stretched on, one last thought crossed Samantha's mind. Had they truly won? Or had they simply played their final part in a game they could never fully understand? Either way, they were free. And that was all that mattered. Part 30v. The endgame, as the last remnants of the dark forest melted away, Samantha and Ethan found themselves standing at the edge of a new world, one that felt like a breath of fresh air. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by a soft, golden light that bathed the landscape. They looked at each other, and for the first time, they felt a sense of relief. They had survived, but more importantly, they had escaped the nightmare. But as they took their first steps into this new world, a final whisper floated on the wind, so faint that it was almost imperceptible. "You can never truly escape me." Samantha froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned toward Ethan, who had already heard the whisper too. But there was no shadow behind them, no dark figure in sight. It was as if the voice had come from everywhere, and yet nowhere at all. "Did you hear that?" Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes wide with dread. "Yeah, I did." But before either of them could speak further, a cold wind swept through the new world, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The shadows began to stretch once again, pulling them back into the depths of the unknown. And as the darkness closed in, they realized the truth. The game had never truly ended. It had merely been waiting for them to lower their guard.